It takes a lot to surprise the seasoned police of the NYPD. But in 2016, a perplexing case leaves New York City detectives and the city itself in utter shock.
The media coverage for this case was off the charts. People were obsessed.
It's as bizarre a case as you'll ever see.
You have this beautiful woman just basically comatose in lingerie.
There were pills laying around. She staged the scene to make it look like it was a suicide.
As police delve in, the evidence quickly leads to more mysteries than answers.
The last thing she remembered was someone brought her pieces of cheesecake.
And investigators uncover a disturbing pattern.
She prepared fish, and I took 2 bites. That's all I remember.
The tox screen comes back as negative. It doesn't pick up on any toxin.
But a new challenge surfaces when investigators find their suspect. A notorious international seductress who's been targeting victims in at least 2 countries.
It wasn't just a poisoning, it was a stolen identity. There was a dominatrix aspect.
We found out that the person who committed this crime was wanted for murder.
And at that point, she got some fake documents and tried to blackmail her into working for them.
To locate their killer, multiple investigations unite.
She was trying to change her identity to hide who she actually was.
She said the Russian government tried to blackmail her.
She needed to do all of this so that she could never go back to Russia.
New York City is home to immigrants from every corner of the world, including several large Russian-speaking communities.
The Russian community in Brooklyn, I mean, it's very large and very varied. The majority of the people that live there are just regular people, you know. They work, they do their best, have a good life, you know, live the American dream. Automatically, there's this, like, you know, kinship, I guess, because you're from the same place.
On August 29, 2016, one of these neighborhoods becomes the scene of an unusual emergency.
911 gets a panicked phone call that there is an unconscious woman at her home in Queens.
On the line, a panicked landlord explains he found his tenant, 35-year-old Olga Svik, in dire condition.
First responders rush to the scene, assess the scene. Everything looks a little off.
She's found in her bedroom in really rough shape. She's not responsive. She's really not moving. She's pale white.
The landlord tells paramedics after not seeing Olga for 2 days, he checked on her and found her completely out of it.
This is quite bad. Our landlord sees pills all over the room. The heat was up extensively.
They look around, and they draw the only conclusion that this is probably a troubled woman. She killed herself.
Not a lot of people who commit suicide through pills throw the pills all over the room. Doesn't make sense. The fact that the heat was on extremely high. It was some 80-some+ degrees in the room. That was odd, too.
You have this beautiful woman just basically comatose in lingerie. It almost looks like if you picture what a soap opera scene would look like if you staged a dramatic end-of-life scene.
First responders immediately rush Olga to the hospital. Thankfully, emergency room doctors are able to stabilize her.
Olga was extremely lucky that she had somebody come down and check on her. She was extremely close to death and could have been dead within the next hour.
Olga displays weakness, fatigue, memory loss, disorientation. So they do a physical exam, try to figure out what's going on. One of the diagnostic tools that they use in the hospital is a urine screen. The test tries to figure out whether or not there's an amount of toxin within a particular range.
The test should reveal what kind of pills are in Olga's system. But the results are unexpected.
Her tox screen comes back as negative. It doesn't pick up on any toxin.
When nothing was raised in these test results, that was really curious.
When medical staff approach Olga with questions about what happened, she doesn't seem to remember anything, but insists this was no suicide attempt.
So the doctors at the hospital, when they do their review, they're thinking at the time, what's going on? We don't know anything about Olga. Is her story true? Does it make sense? The big question at that point is why, number one, and where's my evidence?
Olga, take one, mark.
My first name Olga, last name is Tsyk, Tsyk. I was born in Ukraine, in Vinnytsia. I used to work as a travel agent, so I used to travel a lot. And when in my country, in 2014, we have a war starting, I decided to just change something in my life. And I decided to try myself in United States.
Olga sought out friends in New York City who helped her find a residence.
Olga was living in a single-family home that was owned by a gentleman who lived on the ground floor.
He lived on the first floor because he's old, like 86 years old, and he were like my family. I call him my American uncle.
She lived in a sweet little neighborhood of Queens, got along and knew her neighbors really well.
She also found a new career in cosmetology.
I was excited to try something new. I started working as a lash technician. It was like my hobby before, but here it was my main job. It was a good situation for me to work around people who talk English and with the Russian community people. So yeah, it was really good.
She really made a life for herself out here, and it, by all accounts, seemed that things were going really well.
Now, just 2 years into her American dream, Olga has narrowly survived a harrowing near-death experience. Medical staff are trying to determine what happened to her, but with Olga still having no memory of it, doctors find themselves at a dead end.
The urinalysis and the blood tests come up empty. They don't have a lead to really go on.
What the hospital has is someone with an altered mental status who displays weakness, fatigue, memory loss, disorientation, but clinically and diagnostically doesn't show that anything has happened to them. So they provided Olga with fluids, they monitored her, and when her condition improved to a point, they discharged her.
I remember when I got home from the hospital, and also not all the picture, just some short moments.
When friends check on Olga a few days later, their concerns grow.
She was well enough to be discharged, but she's not well yet. She can't really talk that well. She can't really walk that well. She's certainly not herself. Her friend called Olga's sister Irina and notifies Irina that Olga's really not doing well.
When my sister got a call from my friend and she realized that something wrong with me, something not good, and she catch the first flight to New York.
When Irina arrives on August 30th and sees Olga's apartment, she's left with a sinking feeling.
She find the pills around me, around my bed.
Irina looks in the few areas that she knows Olga keeps her valuables.
The passport, the working papers, money, jewelry. All these things are missing from her house, and she knows this almost immediately.
Irina goes to the precinct and says to the police, somebody's stolen my sister's property. So Irina is reporting a larceny.
Police open an investigation and visit Olga's house the next day. Upon arrival, Olga's sister Irina fills officers in on Olga's strange illness, stating that her sister's missing property is just the beginning of her concerns.
Her sister Irina told us there were pills all over the room. That was odd.
They think I took a pills and tried to poison myself. But she knew me. She knew that I'm never gonna do that.
Irina leads officers to speak with Olga, whose gradual recovery has helped her regain foggy memories.
I remember first when my sister came into my room with the detectives. They asked me the question, and some of them I don't remember.
When Irina started talking to her, she was getting more and more information.
Before she got really ill, the last thing she remembered was someone coming over, a client of hers, Viktoriya.
She came to me every 2-3 weeks. She come all the way from the Brooklyn to Queens.
Viktoriya tells Olga that she's going to Mexico in a few days or in a day, and she absolutely needs to have her lashes fixed. She knew that she wasn't working that day. Please, 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 could she come to her apartment to get this fixed? Olga says yes.
It was Sunday. It was my day off. Usually I don't take my client at home. I didn't listen my intuition, and I say, okay, just come, and I'm gonna do it for you.
She was the last person who saw her before she got really ill.
At this point, the police are starting to say, we need to find Viktoriya.
Coming up, Olga continues to recount her brush with death.
She opened the box in front of me like this. I eat just for politeness.
This particular criminal, she's in the wind.
As police struggle to piece together what happened, more victims surface.
He didn't even exactly know how he ended up in the hospital.
I never thought about she's gonna drug me.
We put that out to other squads so they know, look out for this person.
With Olga's memories starting to surface, detectives have her walk them through what happened, starting with more details about the last person she remembers seeing, her client, Viktoriya.
She was my client, I believe, more than 6 months. She was very open. She tells me that she had beauty salon in Moscow. So like she represents herself like she's successful businesswoman.
Viktoriya had become such a regular that when she asked for an emergency touch-up, Olga agreed.
As a thank you for doing this solid favor on your day off, Viktoriya brought her pieces of cheesecake from a very famous bakery in Brooklyn.
Olga says Viktoriya's behavior seemed off.
We come up to my room, and she say, you can't understand how tasty this cake. She opened the box in front of me like this, and she picked one and she ate. It was like very fast, and she picked another one, and she left me just one piece. And I say, okay, maybe she's like hungry. I don't know. I eat not because I was hungry or something, just for politeness.
Within a few minutes, Olga began to feel sick.
I just tried to find my bed to lie down. And I tell her, oh my God, Viktoriya, something wrong,
She started feeling weird, woozy, sick to her stomach, nauseous. She threw up off the side of the bed.
And she tells me, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna clean everything. I just remember that she came to my room with the paper towels. So, and that's it.
When Olga's sister Irina told her she'd been robbed, she suspected Viktoriya was the culprit.
I don't have my passport, I don't have my work authorization, no my money. She left in my wallet just $17. That's it. I realized she even took my perfumes,
She also believes Viktoriya drugged her as an attempt to cover her tracks.
Viktoriya, she is preparing to look me like suicide, like I poisoned myself.
It was thought that this was a staged crime scene because she's very adamant in the fact that she was drugged.
Investigators discover one piece of evidence they hope could validate Olga's story.
Inside of the trash can at Olga's house, detectives find a container with the cheesecake crumbs still in it. Immediately, this container is bagged and tagged as evidence, and it is sent in for testing.
We have the wrapper, we have part of the cheesecake, we test it, and we get nothing.
That means there is no known banned controlled substance that we can pick up in this box. There was also a DNA test that was run on it, and the DNA came back initially as belonging to a female who's not Olga's Vic.
Detectives assume the DNA belongs to Viktoriya, but without a last name, police can't even confirm Viktoriya is her real name.
The issue was, Viktoriya and Olga always met at the salon. This was the first time they met outside at her apartment, and Olga had no idea where she lived, and cops couldn't find an address.
We have a phone number for her, but she doesn't answer it.
This person doesn't seem to exist.
That's not a lot to go on. So at that point, it's simply being investigated as a larceny. And it's an open larceny.
I tell them everything what happened, but I feel like they just don't believe me. They don't trust. I think maybe they think I do drugs, maybe I overdose something,
Olga and her sister try to put the ordeal behind them. But a few days later, Olga receives a message from an encrypted phone number.
I saw the text message. It was Viktoriya. She asked me, Olga, where are you? I can reach you. What happened? Is that? And I didn't answer.
Moments later, her phone rings.
She called me, and I pick up the phone. And she asked me, Olga, what happened to you? I can reach you. I say, Viktoriya, you stolen a lot of stuff from me. You poisoned me. And you know what her answer was? She tells me, okay, so go to police.
To Olga, the message is clear.
I was scared because I feel like she wants to get done what she doesn't finish. I realized that she really wants to kill me.
It's been 1 week since Olga Svik was released from the hospital due to a mysterious illness. She believes one of her clients, Viktoriya, is the one responsible. After confronting her possible attacker over the phone, Olga comes away shaken.
So I was always like scared, always look around, you know. My friends, they always drive me to my house and they always waiting for me to watch how I get in door to the house.
With the NYPD unable to pursue her case, Olga tries her best to move forward.
Olga stayed out of work for about a week or 2 weeks, maybe more, and she ultimately returned to work sometime in mid to late September.
When I start working, it was very difficult for me. I start to take clients like 1 per day, you know.
One of her regular customers asked her why she had been out. And when Olga said, I was sick and I didn't feel well, the customer asked some follow-up questions.
They say, I just don't want to talk about it. I tell, I got sick, you know. And they say, somebody's poisoned me.
Her customer's reaction to the news is unexpected.
This customer said to Olga, I can't believe you're saying this to me because I happen to know somebody who over the summer went out on a date with a woman, had dinner with her, ate food, became very sick, and went to the hospital.
She tells me, maybe this is the same person. After work, she texts me, Olga, can I give you a number? His name is Ruben.
Shortly thereafter, Olga calls Ruben. Olga relays her story to Ruben, exactly how it happened, and says to him, the person that poisoned me was this woman, Viktoriya. Ruben says to her, I don't know any Viktoriya. The person that poisoned me was a woman named Anna.
He sent me her picture, and it's her. Then I was like shocked.
So at that point, they both think that they were poisoned by the same person.
Olga agrees to meet with Ruben to hear his story in detail.
I'm here 43 years. Came here 1980 from Russia, and I lived in a Russian neighborhood all this time.
Ruben says he met the woman he calls Anna on a Russian dating app 2 months ago in June 2016.
I was single at the time, you know, I was dating, checking girls out, and I met her and she gave me her number. She said she came from Russia like not long ago. I started talking to her and she was a very smart woman. She said, you like to eat? I like to cook. So I was like, of course. She said, Sunday, I'll buy some food and I'll prepare to cook. And I was like, sure, why not?
The date was to be held at her apartment in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn.
Sunday, I went, I bought her flowers, I bought her wine, and I went to her home.
Upon arrival, Ruben says he was surprised to find her apartment empty.
I was like, where is the furniture? Carpet was rolled up. I was shocked, and she said she had a roommate, she just moved out. I was like, okay. And she said, come, the table is ready. It was a mini table. And I had my own wine. She prepared fish. I took 2 bites. I drank a wine. That's all I remember. I never thought about she's gonna shrug me.
Ruben says 2 days later, he woke up in a hospital room.
He didn't even exactly know how he ended up in the hospital. He's there for about a week. Tests are run, but they can't really figure out what's wrong with him. The medical record lists a number of his symptoms, like memory loss, fatigue, weakness, these type of things. The medical records between Ruben and Olga were almost identical.
The doctors, they took my blood and they're saying, he's clean, he's clean. I don't understand. I just don't get it.
They give him fluids, they give him some food, they monitor him and find that he's okay to be discharged. But even at the discharge point, they don't know what happened to this person.
I remember Ruben called me and told me the story. He really got sick. He almost got in coma. I got sick. Somebody poisoned me. He got poisoned too. Maybe this is the same person.
Ruben learned he was taken to the hospital by his sister. She said a woman brought him to the dry cleaning store he owned and claimed he'd passed out on a date.
And when she brought me back to my store, she was saying that, oh, he got drunk, he's this and that. She gave me my phone, but no money, of course. She took my watch. It's $800-something watch. When I got my phone back, she erased everything. She erased all the texts we did. All my phone was clear.
For good measure, when she dropped him off, Anna allegedly swiped $500 from the cash register.
The store's surveillance cameras caught the whole thing on tape.
His business had footage of Anna in his office, going through personal things, going through drawers and things like that. Ruben had no memory of this whatsoever.
I saw me on the camera, but I don't remember nothing. It's like, wow, it was weird.
Like Olga, Ruben spent the next 2 days feeling disoriented. When he recovered, he found out Anna had stolen more than he realized.
His American Express charge card has something like $2,600 worth of new charges that he has no idea where they came from.
After 2 weeks recovering from the shock of it all, Ruben decided to take action and report the crime to Brooklyn police.
He tells me that he went to the police precinct and they think she was his girlfriend and they broke up, and that's why, you know.
So I left. I was like, you know what, they don't want to take information, it's okay. I tried to do my own investigation because I was mad that, you know, she got me. And then I thought about it and I was like, you know what, I'm alive. It's okay, and I let it go till Olga.
Olga and Ruben feel the similarities are too strong to deny. And they hope the NYPD agrees.
We went together to the police precinct and they realized that it's really serious.
2 victims talked about it, met in this small community and made this happen. Really interesting. Now you have a connection that you didn't have before.
Coming up, investigators discover evidence of a crime spree.
We start connecting different cases from different boroughs. We realized that we had numerous victims.
And they uncover a suspect on the run.
She was a wanted fugitive in Russia.
She got pictures in the car with her mother's body slumped over next to her in the passenger seat.
She is wanted for killing someone halfway across the world.
In September 2016, after Olga Svik and Ruben Borikov present their stories to the NYPD, both cases are revived.
We don't know any real pedigree information for this woman. Viktoriya, don't know where she works, don't know where she lives.
She used all these different names, and we have an MO, which was unusual. That poisoning thing, that's really odd, and also within a Russian community. So now we have possibly a Russian person committing these crimes.
Detectives also find it unusual that two nearly identical cases took place in different areas of the city.
It's rare that we get something in a different borough across the city. It's rare. But it's our job to be able to make those connections when we can. When something jumps out, like a poisoning, we put that out to other squads so they know, be on the lookout for this person.
Investigators quickly discover several more crimes with similar MOs.
We start looking at all like grand larcenies, connecting different cases from different boroughs. And we start making what we call a pattern. We realized that we had numerous victims from other areas. There was 2 cases. Both of them were located in Coney Island, both in the Ocean Parkway area. 2 Russian individuals who both go home with a dark-haired female.
In both cases, the victims are male, and they remember blacking out after eating or drinking.
One of the individuals met her on a dating site and arranged to go on a date with her to a coffee shop. He ordered coffee, she had wine. Within 15 or 20 minutes, started to feel very, very sick. On the ride back, he's actually saying to her in the car, "I'm not feeling well." She says to him, "Don't worry, let's pull over. I'll drive." They go back to his place. It's at or about that point where his memory completely cuts out. The following morning, he wakes up in his bed and cash and jewelry is missing from his house.
The victims' stories are eerily similar. Except one victim says the woman was named Mara, the other calls her Rachel.
Because they're communicating on these dating apps, there's really no information other than that in terms of tracking back this person. She may or may not have been using a fake name. No phone number, no address, no other kind of pedigree information.
Whatever the woman's real name is, the men say her profile advertised more than just dating.
One of the things that she offered was to come and perform for them sort of BDSM activities that they wanted done.
These men didn't want anybody to know about, they weren't open about their BDSM preferences or whatever.
Detectives know the clandestine nature of these trysts could be stopping more victims from reporting.
Maybe they won't come forward because of obvious reasons, embarrassment and things of that shame. So we don't know exactly how many victims there are.
Luckily, the man who identified the suspect as Mara is able to give police the address of the apartment she took him to.
He said he went to use the bathroom, and when he came out of the restroom, he realized that his car keys and wallet were missing, and so was Mara. His vehicle was also removed from the location.
When detectives contact the owner of the apartment, she claims a friend asked her to let a woman stay there for a few days.
She didn't know the individual, but did provide us at that time with a cell phone number. We did computer checks with that number.
The computer check provides detectives with a full name and possible lead. Viktoriya Nasyrova. Investigators learn she is a 41-year-old Russian woman in the United States on a visa.
There was a prior incident that occurred in Manhattan where she was arrested for allegedly stealing. The petty larceny is a minor crime. You get a desk appearance ticket. You get fingerprinted. If there's no warrants, local warrants for you, you will get released on a summons.
Detectives run her name through their database and find that it is also associated with an international record.
After running the name in our databases, they realized there is an Interpol warrant for her out of Russia. And they provided us with a photo, which was placed into a photo array.
The local victims who are willing to talk confirm Viktoriya Nasyrova is the woman investigators are looking for.
Now you got a connection here, and all of a sudden, the case gets connected back to Olga's case.
At this point, we found out that the person who committed this crime in New York City was a wanted fugitive, was wanted for murder in Russia, involving a woman named Alla Alexenko. The Russian government contacts Interpol, which is a global law enforcement agency. Interpol issues what is known as a red notice, which is essentially a worldwide wanted flyer of the highest category.
Now all of a sudden we have a whole different case. We have an international killer.
We activated what is called an investigation card. It's almost like a warrant. If the police department comes in contact with her, she would be detained and held for the investigation.
While detectives are on the hunt for Viktoriya Nasyrova, the stakes rise when they learn she's already wanted in her home country of Russia for the 2014 murder of Alla Alexenko.
Olga's case has been connected to Viktoriya, and now it's wrapped up in this international fugitive who is wanted for killing someone halfway across the world.
Not only is Viktoriya wanted for murder, but the victim's daughter, Nadia Ford, has been desperately searching for Viktoriya for 2 years. In 2017, unaware of Viktoriya's more recent attacks, Nadia seeks help from a private investigator.
Nadia Ford is originally from Krasnodar, Russia, born and raised there. I believe sometime in 2010 or 2011, she moved to the United States. She maintained a really good relationship with her mom, which is a woman named Alla Alexenko.
Nadia said that Viktoriya killed her mother. She's convinced Nadia was very instrumental in pushing the Russian authorities to investigate.
The Russian government has been unable to gain traction on the case, so Nadia hired New York private investigator Herman Weisberg.
Nadia was introduced to me by a common friend. She was crying uncontrollably. I felt very bad for her. She explained that her mother was a victim of a homicide in Russia.
Nadia tells Weisberg the trouble began in 2013 when her mother Alla was befriended by a much younger woman living next door in Krasnodar, Russia.
The new neighbor that had moved in turned out to be Viktoriya Nasyrova. As soon as the friendship had begun, I think Nadia was a little suspect of it.
Alla was older, seemingly from a blue-collar family, humble, sort of like somebody's grandma, right? Viktoriya, on the other hand, was always decked out in fur coats and wore a lot of makeup and jewelry. She had much more of a luxurious outlook. Sometimes loneliness, right, is the type of thing that can motivate somebody to make an unusual friend. And I think that part of the reason why Viktoriya was successful in gaining Alla's trust is because Alla lived alone, and Viktoriya was right there. She was able to put up a front that Alla was very receptive to, and because she was a good-hearted lady, a giving type of personality, a trusting type of personality, she decided to make this friendship work. So sometime in 2013, Nadia visits and gets to meet Viktoriya. They spend time together, they go out, they form a little bit of a bond. Viktoriya later tells Nadia, oh, I'm thinking about coming to New York. At some point in 2014, the following year, Alla says to her, well, you know, if you're going to go, could you give some things to Nadia? Personal items like clothing and things like that. So then time is passing, and Viktoriya is not going back to New York, and she still is holding on to those things. Alla is now chatting with Nadia. If she's not going to go to New York, she might as well give me the stuff back. Alla had actually hinted to Nadia that I'm going to confront Viktoriya about this because this is strange.
Nadia tells Weisberg that's the last conversation she ever had with her mother.
On October 4th or 5th of 2014, Alla goes radio silent.
Nadia Ford was very much in touch with her mom, daily basis, regular routine phone calls. A day didn't go by where they didn't communicate.
An hour goes by, 2 hours go by, a full day goes by, and Nadia still can't get in contact with her mom. It was pretty strange to her.
Nadia actually calls Viktoriya as well. She has her number. Viktoriya says, I haven't seen her. She may have left with some friends. Maybe that's where she turned her phone off. Nadia doesn't bite.
Nadia decides to look into the phone history of her mom's cell phone because she was the one that set up the phone for her to begin with. So she logs online and is able to look at the call history on that phone. She recognizes the final phone number that have had any contact with her mom to be the phone number of Viktoriya Nasyrova. This raises alarm bells because Viktoriya didn't say anything to her about calling her or contacting her over the phone.
She made arrangements to get on a plane and head to Russia about as fast as anybody would have. And immediately she knows something's wrong as soon as she gets to her mom's apartment.
The place has been ransacked. There are a lot of things missing. Documents, fur coats, perfumes.
Nadia discovered something else was missing. The large amount of money her mother kept hidden in the apartment.
Just before her disappearance, Alla, with Nadia's help, had sold a piece of property in Russia and had gotten a nice sum for it, somewhere probably around $50,000. She realizes that cash is missing. That discovery confirms to her that something really is seriously going on.
Immediately, Nadia contacts Russian authorities to look into her mother's disappearance.
In Nadia's mind, her mom is a hostage. She's been kidnapped, she's been taken somewhere. Worst case scenario, she's dead. Nadia asked the police if they could essentially set up like a sting operation. They provide some undercover personnel, and they arrange to follow Nadia to the apartment where she's going to confront Viktoriya.
When Nadia Ford meets with private investigator Herman Weisberg in 2016, she details her investigations from the last year and a half. Nadia tells Herman that quickly following her mother's disappearance in October of 2014, she worked with Russian authorities to set up a sting operation to apprehend Viktoriya Nasyrova.
Nadia meets with Viktoriya outside of the apartment building. Seemingly, it's just the two of them. Police, however, are on site. Can't be seen, though. Nadia grabs her pretty aggressively, squeezes her, and says, "Where's my mom? I know there's something going on with my mom." Viktoriya panics, sort of breaks away from the hold, and starts screaming, "Your mom is fine, your mom is fine." At this point, the police are starting to come out of their hiding place. Viktoriya does a 180 and books it, runs into the building to get away from Nadia and the police. They apprehend her, and they bring her back to the precinct.
Russian police start speaking with her. And of course she knows, I don't know what you're talking about. She does this whole thing. So at that point, they do a lie detector test, all right? And she fails it miserably.
Unfortunately, with no concrete evidence tying Viktoriya to the robbery or Nadia's missing mother, They had to let her go.
When they don't have enough, you have to let them go. That happens even over here. So you don't have enough, but you still work the case.
While the case remains open for authorities, Nadia decides she would continue investigating on her own.
Nadia stays in Russia. She is like a dog with a bone, and she's not going to give up until she finds out what's going on with her mom.
Nadia reasoned that if Viktoriya did kill her mother, Alla, she must have moved her body.
She was able to go to traffic cameras and kind of plot the course of Viktoriya leaving her apartment, which is astounding police work for somebody that doesn't do this for a living.
Nadia reviewed footage from the day Alla disappeared and found blurry video of a car leaving her mother's home.
She got pictures of Viktoriya driving south in the car with her mother's body slumped over next to her in the passenger seat.
She takes that to the police. They find out the plate. The car was registered to Viktoriya.
The authorities track the GPS signal from Viktoriya Nasyrova's cell phone at or about the time of Alla's disappearance. And what they find is that essentially her phone tracked a particular path that day going from one city to another within Russia. She sort of does like a loop where she goes to it's this area just outside Armavir, is there for a while, and then leaves.
In April of 2015, 7 months after Alla goes missing, investigators follow Viktoriya's trail of digital breadcrumbs and make a devastating discovery.
The Russian authorities, they ask themselves, why would she take this pit stop in sort of like this neck of the woods for this period of time on that particular day? So they're able to zone in on it. They get cadaver dogs, and after searching for an extensive period of time, they're able to find burnt remains of a human body.
They find the remains of a body. They were so far gone that they could only be identified through dental records. And that is how they realized that they had a murder on their hands and that it was the murder of Alla Alisenko.
Her body was in bad shape physically, but we don't know what happened to Alla.
The evidence gave Russian police everything they needed to charge Viktoriya with murder. But there was another problem.
That Viktoriya Nasyrova is nowhere to be found in the city that she was living or anywhere in Russia.
Viktoriya had a relationship, apparently, with somebody high up in the police department, and she was getting information, so she had escaped Russia.
At that point, as we say in the business, she's in the wind. She flies out of the country.
The red notice was issued in July of 2015. This is about 10 months after Alla's disappearance.
With the search for her mother having concluded in the worst possible outcome, Nadia returns to New York. However, Nadia says the mystery seems to have followed her home. Nadia tells Weisberg she has reason to believe Viktoriya escaped to the United States and is now hiding in New York.
Nadia heard from some of her acquaintances in Brooklyn that Viktoriya was in the area. She was also directed to find a Facebook account, which was a variation of Viktoriya's first and last name. It was kind of hyphenated, Vina, V-I-N-A, which a lot of people at that time were doing with Facebook accounts to, not use their full name.
Nadia, fortuitously, comes across a photo of the person she knows to be Viktoriya Nasyrova, and it's tagged at a location in Brooklyn. So now, Nadia is afraid because in her mind, perhaps Viktoriya is in New York because she wants to do something to Nadia. Nadia is in a difficult predicament. She can't go to the NYPD and say, there's this woman who's here in New York who I think did something to my mom in Russia. So Nadia hires Herman and asks him to look into this person.
The more she talked, the more I felt if the NYPD, if Interpol, if Russia, if nobody can catch this woman, I don't know why I'm sitting in this conference table, frankly, but I should help her by any means necessary.
Coming up, the search for Viktoriya heats up.
I have a tendency to look at what they're not showing me. I noticed that there was pretty unique stitching in the vehicle that she was in.
And evidence continues to mount.
I sent out my surveillance teams. I had them all split up.
He told us, look, take them all. I don't want any of her stuff here.
They came across Olga Zvik's Ukrainian passport.
In March 2016, the NYPD continues its investigation into Viktoriya Nasyrova, a Russian criminal they believe poisoned Olga Zvik and several men across the city. Meanwhile, private investigator Herman Weisberg begins one of his own.
I decided to just take it on, and I became kind of obsessed with it because of how bad I felt for Ms. Ford.
Weisberg starts to piece together as much as he can as a private investigator to find Viktoriya. He has obviously some ability to research databases, so he knows that there's a red notice for her. He then tries to look into her footprint, her online footprint.
There wasn't much there except for a Facebook account. But on Facebook, you know, it's very interesting to me that people are showing off. So when I look at anybody's Facebook page, I have a tendency to look at what they're not showing me. So I look past it and I look into the backgrounds, or I look at the other people in the shot. I noticed Viktoriya liked wearing those mirrored aviator sunglasses. And I love that because I like looking in the reflection for the little things that Viktoriya didn't mean to put out there.
He found one picture of her, a selfie, and there was a reflection in her aviators of a car. So he started to take a close look at the card.
I noticed that there was pretty unique stitching in the vehicle that she took this selfie in. Also, the clock on the dashboard was a very unique shape. I had some confidence that the car would still be connected to her.
Weisberg knows that in a city the size of New York, finding a single car can be like finding a needle in a haystack. He begins with zeroing in on the specific make and model.
I chose to walk around a parking lot that had, I don't know, thousands of vehicles.
Before the end of the first day, Herman's determination pays off. He spots a vehicle that matches the interior reflected in Viktoriya's sunglasses.
When I stumbled upon what turned out to be a Chrysler 300, I looked at it for about 20 minutes with my mouth open saying, holy, I actually just came across this car because I had given up 100 times in my mind.
The car doesn't belong to Viktoriya, but at least now Weisberg knows what he's looking for.
I still had to locate the vehicle in Brooklyn, but I was hoping that there were only a few in the areas that I had triangulated. On Viktoriya's Facebook page, she had done what's called liking different establishments, different businesses. There was a Mexican restaurant, there was a pizza place, maybe a nail or a hair salon, and they were all in close proximity to one another. I sent out my surveillance teams, had them all split up. Luckily for me, a Chrysler 300 with that interior package was relatively rare. Within 6 hours, my surveillance team found Viktoriya and her then boyfriend going out shopping and using that vehicle. We watched Viktoriya Nasyrova and her boyfriend going to pick up a flat-screen TV that they both had to carry back to their apartment building. And it was quite obvious, their use of keys to get entry, that's where they both lived. It definitely gave me a lot of confidence that we were on the right people at the right place. It flashed through my brain like, this is the craziest thing ever. I don't know how me and my team just did this, but there it is. Boom, done. I mean, I got her.
Now, private investigator Herman Weisberg and his team need the NYPD to finish the job and apprehend Viktoriya. In the midst of their own investigation, detectives receive Weisberg's fortuitous tip.
I got a phone call from a private investigator. He stated to me that he was hired by a family in Russia to attempt to locate Viktoriya. And he believed that he knew the location of her.
Detectives let Weisberg know they've been searching for Viktoriya for 7 months in response to a series of robberies and the attempted murder of Olga Svick.
I wasn't even aware at that time of what had transpired with Olga. I mean, I had my hunches about her from the beginning, that she's been up to no good for a long time here. I guess I was right about her. She don't care about anything but herself.
On March 16, 2016, the NYPD and private investigator Herman Weisberg combine forces to zero in on Viktoriya Nasyrova and make an arrest.
Within 48 hours, I was meeting them in front of that location in Brooklyn where she had resided.
She was living with someone named Vladimir, who was a boyfriend at the time.
They went up to her boyfriend's apartment, asked if Viktoriya was there, which she replied yes. They asked Viktoriya to step out, and they handcuffed her and brought her to the 60th precinct.
After a 7-month-long manhunt, Viktoriya is finally in custody.
I asked her if she knew why she was apprehended, and she denied everything of she had no idea what was going on.
I saw Viktoriya get put in handcuffs and walked out the front door. I already had Nadja's phone number ready to call her. I said, we got her. Her reaction was like music when you hear something like that, when, you could hear the joy in her voice.
Now, the challenge for investigators is to connect her to the crimes she's suspected of committing.
So the very first thing that the New York Police Department had to do is figure out, was the person responsible for some or all of their open investigations? So they arranged with each detective who's handling each of the open investigations to conduct a lineup.
We brought all the victims to the precinct. They were able to view each lineup separately, and they don't get to speak with each other.
Police ask me if I see Viktoriya Nasyrova in that room, and I say, yeah, I see her.
Then they call me to Brooklyn to identify her. I went there and I saw her.
Viktoriya was identified in all these separate cases that we had at that time. And then she was charged for grand larceny for 3 individuals.
I was in shock, and in the same time I feel relieved.
After notifying Interpol of Viktoriya's arrest, detectives begin building a case strong enough to convict her.
After the arrest of Viktoriya, we went back to Viktoriya's boyfriend's house and we asked for consent to search his apartment. He was very shocked and almost depressed. He said they were having a little trouble and that she had moved out and was just recently moved back into the apartment in March.
Viktoriya's boyfriend Vladimir says the reason for their breakup was his dog, Joey.
Joey had died of very mysterious circumstances just weeks prior. Viktoriya, during the course of her relationship with Vladimir, made it known that she didn't really like the dog, in part because Vladimir was so close with this dog. Everywhere that Vladimir went, the dog went.
One morning, he woke up and the dog was no longer with him.
There was talk about her poisoning her boyfriend's dog. It's not a far stretch for me to think of what happened.
When investigators tell Vladimir about the people Viktoriya allegedly poisoned, he agrees to help.
Vladimir gave the police the permission for them to search some personal bags that she had in his home.
She had just moved back into his apartment. It was so recent that her bags were still packed. He told us, look, take them all. I don't want any of her stuff here.
Viktoriya's luggage provides them with a treasure trove of evidence.
As we're going bag by bag, we found Olga's jewelry that Olga described that was removed from her during her crime.
They also came across Olga Zvik's employment authorization card and her Ukrainian passport.
Tucked inside Olga's passport, officers find a recent photo of Viktoriya, and they're struck by how similar the two women look.
They're not 100% twins, but they can be mistaken for each other. I believe she was trying to change her identity to be Olga, to hide who she actually was, maybe because of the Interpol warrant.
Prisons in Russia are pretty notorious for being grim and horrific places to serve out your time. And she did not want to face the murder charge for Alla Alisenko's death.
But detectives know that to get away with it, Viktoriya needed Olga out of the picture permanently.
You can't steal somebody's passport because they're going to go and report the passport stolen, and Viktoriya's smart enough to know that. It's my belief that Viktoriya used the poisoned cheesecake to make it look like it was a suicide. She staged the scene with other pills laying around. She staged the scene by changing Olga's clothing into lingerie. So if the police or anybody had found her dead, they would have immediately thought suicide.
It's a perfect setup. You know, Olga was in her own home, no one was watching.
That's how brilliant Viktoriya Nasyrova was, in that she thought of almost every single detail to make this the perfect crime. What she didn't think about was the likelihood that Olga would survive.
Coming up, an international killer becomes a New York tabloid star.
You don't get a case like this every day.
She's a pathological liar, you know.
And the story she tells is stranger than fiction.
She told me herself she would meet men on BDSM websites.
After her arrest, Viktoriya Nasyrova is held without bail in Rikers Island. She refuses to speak to investigators about her alleged crimes, but seems more than willing to tell her story to reporters.
The media coverage for this case was off the charts. People were obsessed, particularly in New York, because you had all of these added elements. It wasn't just a poisoning, it was a stolen identity. There was a dominatrix aspect. She was from another country. She was also beautiful. You don't get a case like this every day.
Over the next few months, Viktoriya gives the media all the headlines they could ask for.
I met her several times at Rikers. Viktoriya is very charismatic, very talkative. No, she tells me she didn't do anything. She said she's been framed, she's innocent.
Part of the allure comes from the tale Viktoriya spins about her past.
She comes from southern Russia. She came of age in the 90s. And the collapse of the Soviet Union out in the south, it was hellish life. People had nothing, people didn't have food. You go to the store and there's nothing there, You just survive.
Viktoriya's stories include her being forced to join a Russian crime syndicate in her 30s.
She told me that she was doing off-the-books kind of cosmetology work. She couldn't get a mortgage, so she got some fake documents. At that point, the Russian government came and tried to blackmail her into working for them. She said what she would do is she would go and get incriminating information against somebody, and then she would help people, the Russian police, blackmail people for money. She said that she kept very meticulous records of all her assignments for this organization. It's all also shrouded in this sort of conspiracy and mystery.
Viktoriya claims she tried to get out several times, but she knew too much for Russian police to let her go. So they framed her for murder instead.
She said at that point they killed this Alla, the mother of Nadia, her neighbor, and they set it up to make it look like she did it, and they started an investigation against her. And she keeps telling me different versions of the same story where she ended up in the U.S. to try to get away from these people.
While hiding out in the U.S., Viktoriya admits she supported herself by working as a dominatrix.
She told me herself she would meet men on BDSM websites.
And she would say in interviews that she sort of fulfilled their needs and provided a service. She almost acted like she was doing kind of a positive thing for these men.
However, Viktoriya denies poisoning or robbing any of her clients. She also denies trying to kill Olga to steal her identity.
She told me that Olga had sold her Ukrainian passport because Viktoriya was too scared to use her Russian passport.
She talked openly about the day that she went over to Olga's house and telling the media that Olga was already feeling sick and she was unwell prior to her getting to the apartment. The reason she gave for why she was targeted for this crime as the potential perpetrator was that she was being framed by the Russians.
She's a pathological liar, She always makes some new fairy tale.
For prosecutors, Viktoriya's press interviews are a preview of defense strategies she might try in court. And they're concerned that without evidence she poisoned Olga, those strategies might work.
To convict somebody, you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And there was this open question of, what was it that poisoned Olga? The preliminary tests show that there's no controlled substance in the container.
The same can be said for the NYPD's other cases against Viktoriya.
It was a very strange situation that each victim explains the same symptoms. Ruben spent numerous days in the hospital being observed, and they didn't find anything with him. But there was something there that was making each of these individuals pretty much tranquilized for a day or two. The NYPD lab catalog was not big enough to determine the type of drug that was in that cheesecake. So the police department and the district attorney's office spoke, and they said, well, maybe we have to broaden our horizons. A federal agent can test it on their systems, which isn't just the United States narcotics. So I was very excited to hear they were able to break it down a little bit more. And the federal agent was actually able to identify what was used, and it could have killed every single one of these victims.
One of the greatest challenges to the investigation into Viktoriya Nasyrova has been proving attempted murder without a murder weapon. But the Department of Homeland Security has access to technology the NYPD does not.
When the cheesecake container is tested by the Department of Homeland Security, it comes up positive for phenazepam, which is something that the New York Police Department doesn't have in their bracket of controlled substance, because it's not a controlled substance in the United States. This is why that first test came up negative.
Phenazepam is a benzodiazepam, kind of a depressant that was developed in the Soviet Union, and they call it Russian roofie.
It has depressive effects on the human body. It's used primarily to treat seizures, epilepsies, and things like that. If taken in large doses, can cause the heart to slow down to a point where it arrests and it stops.
When investigators see the list of side effects for the drug, which include amnesia, they understand why the victims had a hard time remembering anything.
When she was given these drugs, it would give her enough time to go through their apartments, to find or locate any jewelry or certificates without them waking up or catching her.
A detail of the crime scene in Olga's apartment suggests Viktoriya meant to do more than just knock her out.
Why would the first witnesses say that in late August, when it's hot out, Olga's heater was turned on to the max and the windows were closed and it was incredibly hot in the room?
Extreme heat intensifies the effects. So it stands to reason that the heat was ratcheted up as high as it could go in the heat of summer of the end of August so that it could make the effects more intense and work faster.
Once we had that phenazepam, there's more light shining on Viktoriya that she tried to kill Olga.
Detectives finally have a murder weapon. And they can also prove Viktoriya was the one who used it.
Viktoriya's mouth was swabbed, and there was a comparison done between the results of that mouth swab and the results of the DNA on the cheesecake.
So with her DNA there, it locks her into her being the one who touched and was able to handle that container.
Once it was known that phenazepam was in the container, then that became the bow on top of the case to allow the police department and the Queens DA's office not only to charge Viktoriya with larceny, but also charge Viktoriya with attempted murder, because this was an attempt to kill somebody and steal their identity.
During her arraignment, Viktoriya pleads not guilty to all of the charges against her. Prosecutors start preparing for trial, but despite the new evidence, they hit a roadblock.
We came into a lot of trouble going into court with trying to get the male individuals to come and testify. We have to now put you on a stand and you have to tell your story in public to people that you don't know. Some of them decided that they no longer wanted to go forward and prosecute.
The Brooklyn cases were falling apart, and the Brooklyn DA's office wanted to get something for them.
She was originally charged for grand larcenies. They were downgraded, and she pled guilty to petty larceny misdemeanors.
For drugging and robbing 3 men in Brooklyn, Viktoriya is sentenced to just 90 days in jail. Time she's already served while awaiting trial.
We have no legal authority to charge the Russia investigation. So now the only case that remained was Olga's attempted murder case in Queens.
But due to the COVID pandemic, the trial for attempted murder is delayed several years. In the meantime, Viktoriya notches a major legal victory against the city of New York.
She didn't have an easy time when she was at Rikers waiting to go to trial. She was assaulted inside of the prison and ended up suffering a bunch of different injuries to her body.
A local news station obtains graphic footage of the attack on Viktoriya and airs it on the evening news.
She ended up suing, claiming that the guards were negligent in stopping the attack and they were negligent in protecting her.
So she ended up suing Rikers for $5 million. She got $325,000.
The money that Viktoriya was awarded from what happened to her in jail, that turns everybody's stomach that I've spoken to, including mine.
After Viktoriya spends 6 years behind bars, in 2023, a trial date is finally set for the attempted murder of Olga Svik.
We start preparing and more closer to the date for the trial, I got more scared. And I realized that I have to see that person who wants to kill me. I don't want her to be outside and around people. I was very scared.
On January 30th, 2023, opening arguments are made in one of the most highly anticipated trials in the country.
This seems pretty wild. You know, a sexy, like, vixen trying to kill somebody by feeding them poison cheesecake. Meeting, like, guys online, robbing them, BDSM. It's got everything, right?
But when Viktoriya enters the court, she no longer resembles the seductress whose photos have tantalized tabloid readers for years.
I just look at the woman. She changed, you know. She got more weight and she was like a regular woman.
Several of Viktoriya's alleged victims are called to testify, including Olga.
Then Dino started asking me questions. I was worrying about everything, you know, or about the process, because I never do that before.
Olga came off as a very convincing witness. She came off as credible. She came off as sincere, as did Ruben as well.
I did testify. I said everything true. Like, she could have killed me. She hurt a lot of people. She did a bad thing. And if nobody stops her, she would have keep doing it.
The trial lasted for about a week and a half. It was really emotional. And to see these survivors, I think, really tugged at the heartstrings of the jury.
From the very beginning, we looked at this as Viktoriya Nasyrova attempted to kill Olga Svik, but you can't stop the story there. Your jury is going to say, well, why? Why would she need a new identity? We said to the jury, there's something very serious going on. There was a red notice that was put out for this woman, and she fled Russia. We'd simply alert them to the fact that there was something very serious going on in Russia. We never said anything about a murder, whether she did something wrong or didn't do something wrong. She knows that she's wanted, and she knows, quite frankly, that she's wanted by a government that doesn't afford her the same constitutional protections that we have here. So now, her time is running out in the United States. The valid visa that she had entered the country with was due to expire on September 4th of 2016. She needed to do all of this so that she could never go back to Russia.
The defense insists the state's evidence against Viktoriya is almost entirely circumstantial.
We had the results of the DNA on the cheesecake. But the defense is looking at the fact that there are no third-party witnesses. The only person that's saying that Viktoriya Nasyrova was there is Olga Zvik. So there are no eyewitnesses. There's no surveillance tape. But I think that ultimately the jury saw past those arguments.
The jury takes only an hour and a half to reach a verdict.
Viktoriya Nasyrova was convicted of attempted murder in the second degree, attempted assault in the first degree, assault in the second degree, unlawful imprisonment, and petty larceny.
She was sentenced to 21 years behind bars with credit for time served. So she can be out in roughly 15 years. When she was sentenced, Viktoriya had a full-out outburst in the middle of court and cursed out the judge. What a gem. This woman is a menace to society.
It's as bizarre a case as you'll ever see. It'll be unlikely that we'll ever see another murder or attempted murder with a piece of cheesecake.
Viktoriya is paying for her crimes in the United States, but justice for another crime still awaits overseas.
I sat next to Nadia when the sentence was given by Judge Holder about the 21 years. I think she saw that as a win, but there'll never be a win until Viktoriya pays the price for taking her mom's life.
Presumably, after Viktoriya's sentence, the federal government will work out some arrangement with Russian authorities to extradite her directly to Russia. And if that case is still pending, she should be prosecuted for the murder of Alla Alexenko.
From what I've come to know about Nadia Ford's mom, she was a very giving person. She seemed like she was one of those people that people describe as everybody's mom. And I guess she had a little bit more than Viktoriya had, and Viktoriya turned out wanting that, whatever she had, for herself. This is a person that is dangerous. This is a person that doesn't belong outside of jail.
I could not sleep for months. I would spend hours crying myself, thinking about what happened to me. In the beginning, I just hate her. But after time, I start questioning myself. And I start more studying about psychology, and I forgive her, like really forgive her. I not say that she's a good person. She is dangerous. She in the right place. I forgive her just for myself, because I wanna live my life and enjoy without thinking of her.
It begins with a sound no one remembers clearly anymore. A dull thud, or maybe a door slamming, or maybe nothing at all. Because on that night in November 2003, in a narrow street tucked behind rows of identical brick houses in South London, silence was the last thing anyone noticed before everything changed. By morning, the word had already spread in whispers that moved faster than the cold air creeping through the alleys. Someone was missing. Not gone. not left. Missing. The kind of missing that makes people lower their voices without knowing why. Her name was Emily Carter, 26, a barista at a cafe that smelled permanently of burnt espresso and cinnamon. Known by regulars for remembering orders without writing them down. Known by neighbors for always locking her door twice. Known by no one, it would later seem, in the way that mattered most. The last confirmed sighting came at 9:42 p.m. A grainy CCTV frame, a timestamp flickering at the corner like it was unsure of itself. Emily walking past a convenience store, her coat pulled tight, her breath visible in the cold. Nothing unusual. No one following. No sign of distress. Just another London night swallowing another London life whole. By midnight, her phone stopped responding. By morning, her bed was untouched. By noon, the first patrol unit knocked on her door. The apartment told a story that refused to speak clearly. A mug left half full on the counter. A chair slightly pulled back, as if someone had stood up too quickly. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No blood.
No struggle.
Just absence. The most unsettling kind. The kind that leaves everything intact except the person who matters. Police called it a possible missing persons case within the first 6 hours. By the end of the day, the phrase shifted. Quietly. Without announcement. Suspicious disappearance. 2 words that hang heavier in the air than anyone likes to admit. Neighbors were questioned. Most had nothing. A few had fragments. A man across the street thought he heard footsteps late that night, heavier than usual. A woman upstairs recalled a faint metallic noise, like something brushing against a railing. None of it concrete. None of it useful. All of it unsettling. The first real crack came from a timeline. Emily had texted a friend at 9:18 p.m. A casual message. Heading home. Long day. Coffee tomorrow. The kind of message people send when they expect a tomorrow. When they assume continuity. When they have no idea they're about to become a headline. The distance between the cafe and her apartment was a 10-minute walk. She should have been home by 9:30. The CCTV at 9:42 suggested otherwise. 12 minutes unaccounted for. 12 minutes that would later stretch into years of speculation, obsession, and dead ends. Investigators retraced a route. Every step, every camera, every possible deviation. They mapped it out like a crime scene without a crime. The pavement still held the echo of her last walk, but nothing tangible. No dropped belongings. No witness who could say, "I saw her after that." Just a blank space in the narrative. A gap that swallowed logic. Then came the first whisper of something darker. A taxi driver, working late that night, reported seeing a woman matching Emily's description near the intersection 2 blocks from her flat. He remembered because she looked hesitant.
Paused.
As if deciding whether to cross the street or turn back. He couldn't be sure. The lighting was poor. The memory uncertain. But it was enough to pull investigators deeper into the maze. That intersection became the center of everything. They canvassed every building, checked every camera, interviewed every resident. Doors opened reluctantly. Curtains twitched. People spoke in half sentences, offering details that dissolved under scrutiny. One man claimed he saw a dark-colored car idling near the curb. Another insisted there was no car at all. Contradictions piled up like debris after a storm. Days turned into weeks. The case shifted again. No longer just a disappearance. Now a suspected abduction. Media picked it up. Headlines sharpened. Young woman vanishes without trace. London cold case begins to unfold. The phrase cold case arrived early, almost prematurely, as if the city itself sensed what was coming, that this would not resolve quickly, that answers would not come easily. That something about this case resisted closure. Detectives followed every lead.
Ex-boyfriends.
Co-workers. Casual acquaintances. A man who had once argued with Emily over a spilled drink. A delivery driver who remembered her face, but nothing else. Each name entered into the system. Each name eventually crossed out. Alibis held. Motives dissolved. Suspicion flickered and died. Forensic teams returned to the apartment multiple times, re-examining, retesting, looking for something they might have missed. A fingerprint out of place, a fiber that didn't belong. But the scene remained stubbornly clean. Too clean, some said. As if whatever happened had been executed with precision. Or worse, had happened somewhere else entirely. Then came the discovery that changed the tone of the investigation. 3 weeks after Emily vanished, a backpack was found near a canal several miles away, waterlogged, partially concealed under debris. Inside, her identification, her wallet, a few personal items, everything except her phone. The location didn't fit. It wasn't along her usual route. It wasn't somewhere she had any known connection to. It felt placed, deliberately, like a message or a distraction. The canal search began immediately. Divers combed the water, inch by inch, through freezing temperatures and near-zero visibility. Nothing. No body. No additional evidence. Just murky water and unanswered questions. The backpack raised more questions than it answered. If this was a random abduction, why discard identifiable items so carelessly? If it was someone she knew, why take the risk of moving evidence at all? If she had left voluntarily, an increasingly unlikely theory, why abandon everything that tied her to her identity? Each possibility collapsed under its own contradictions. The investigation widened, then stalled. Months passed. The case cooled, despite the urgency that once fueled it. Leads dried up. Witnesses forgot details they once swore were clear. The city moved on, as it always does, swallowing tragedies into its rhythm. But not everyone moved on. Emily's family refused to let the silence settle. They organized searches, distributed flyers, spoke to anyone who would listen. Her face became familiar in an unsettling way, printed on posters, shared in news segments, remembered in passing conversations that ended with the same phrase. It's strange, isn't it? Yes, it was strange. Because nothing about it made sense. No ransom demand. No credible sightings after that night. No evidence of struggle. No clear motive. Just a life interrupted mid-sentence, leaving behind a story that refused to complete itself. Years slipped by. The case file thickened with paperwork, but thinned in substance. Detectives rotated in and out. Fresh eyes looked at old evidence, hoping to see what others had missed. Occasionally, a new lead would surface, a tip from someone claiming to have seen something, heard something, remembered something. Each time, hope surged briefly before collapsing again. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the case crossed a threshold. It became a cold case. Not officially announced, not marked with a ceremony, just a shift in tone, a change in how it was discussed. Past tense creeping into present conversations. She is a subtle surrender to uncertainty. But the file never closed. Because buried within the reports, the timelines, the contradictory statements, there was a pattern. Faint. Incomplete. But there. A detail that didn't align. A time discrepancy that refused to resolve. A shadow in the CCTV footage that no one could quite identify. Something had been there that night. Something just outside the frame. And for years, it remained that way, unseen, unconfirmed, unanswered. A ghost in the investigation. A presence without a name. Until decades later, when technology advanced, when forgotten evidence was re-examined under sharper lenses, when a single overlooked detail finally surfaced from the noise, something that would force the case back into the light, something that would turn a quiet, unresolved disappearance into a headline that would shock the city all over again. But in 2003, none of that was visible yet. All anyone knew was this. A woman had walked home and never arrived. And somewhere in those missing 12 minutes, something irreversible had happened. Something that left no trace. Or perhaps something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The file never truly went quiet. It only sounded that way to those who stopped listening. Behind the closed doors of evidence rooms and dimly lit offices where fluorescent lights hummed like a constant reminder of unfinished work, the Carter case continued to breathe, slow, shallow, but alive. Every few months, someone would reopen it. A detective with fresh instincts, a supervisor chasing a long shot, or simply a moment of doubt that refused to fade. Because something about it was wrong. Not just unsolved wrong. Like a sentence missing a crucial word. The first real shift came from something almost embarrassingly small. A re-examination of the CCTV footage that had already been watched hundreds of times, frame by frame, second by second, until the images blurred into monotony. But this time, the review wasn't human alone. A new digital enhancement process, primitive by later standards but revolutionary at the time, was applied. Contrast adjusted, shadows lifted, pixels sharpened just enough to suggest details that had once been dismissed as noise. And in that noise, something flickered. At exactly 9:41 and 27 seconds p.m., one frame before Emily passes fully into view, a shape appears at the far edge of the screen. Indistinct, vertical, too narrow to be a vehicle, too tall to be debris. It doesn't move like a person, or rather it moves too little, a stillness that feels deliberate. As if whoever or whatever it is knows exactly where the camera's blind spots begin and end. The frame lasts less than a second. Then it's gone. At first, it was dismissed again. Artifact. Glitch. A trick of low-resolution imaging. But the technician who flagged it couldn't let it go. Because when the frames were layered, overlaid in sequence, a pattern emerged. Not movement. Presence. Something occupying that edge consistently, but only visible when light and shadow aligned just right. A possibility began to form. Fragile. Uncomfortable. Someone had been there. Not following her. Not approaching her. Waiting. The timeline was revisited with this new lens. Not just where Emily had been, but where someone else could have positioned themselves without being seen. The intersection, once just a point of confusion, now became something else entirely. A stage. A place where visibility fractured. Where a person could exist in the margins. Investigators returned to the scene years after the night itself. The street had changed. New signage. Different lighting. Cameras upgraded, repositioned. But the structure remained. Brick facades. Narrow sight lines. Corners that swallowed movement whole. They mapped the angles again. And the realization settled in like a slow chill. There were pockets. Zones where a person could stand completely hidden from every recorded perspective, yet still see everything. A predator's geometry. Precise. Intentional. Known only to someone who had studied it, or lived within it long enough to understand its blind spots instinctively. The case shifted again. No longer random. No longer chaotic. This felt planned. Attention turned inward, toward the community itself. Not strangers passing through, but someone embedded. Someone who knew the rhythm of the street, the timing of foot traffic, the limitations of surveillance. Someone who didn't need to follow Emily because they already knew exactly when she would arrive. A list was drawn up. Residents within a 2-block radius. Delivery workers. Night staff. Anyone with a routine that overlapped consistently with Emily's walk home. The list was long. Too long. And most of it led nowhere. But patterns don't always reveal themselves immediately. Sometimes they hide inside repetition. One name appeared more than once. Not in a suspicious way. Not at first. Just frequently. A maintenance worker assigned to several properties along that street. A man who moved between buildings unnoticed, fixing small problems no one else paid attention to. Doors that didn't close properly. Lights that flickered. Locks that stuck. His name was Daniel Hargrove. Mid-30s at the time. No criminal record. Described by most as quiet. Reliable. Invisible, in the way people who perform routine tasks often are. He had access. not just to buildings but to schedules, to patterns, to the unspoken knowledge of when people came and went. But nothing directly tied him to Emily. No calls, no messages, no known interaction. Just proximity. And proximity, in a city like London, is rarely enough. Still, his name stayed on the board longer than the others. Investigators interviewed him early in the case. The transcript was uneventful. He answered questions calmly, provided an alibi. He had been working late on a plumbing issue in a nearby building. No one could definitively confirm the exact time, but the job itself was real. The report existed. The maintenance log was signed. At the time, it was enough. Years later, it wasn't. Because when the logs were re-examined, something subtle emerged. The timestamp on his report didn't match the system's internal clock. A discrepancy of 7 minutes. Small. Almost insignificant. But in a case defined by 12 missing minutes, 7 becomes interesting. The question wasn't whether he had done the work. The question was when. If the job had been logged after completion, as was common practice, then the recorded time meant nothing. It could have been entered minutes later, or longer. The system wasn't precise. It relied on human input. Human input can be adjusted. The gap reopened. 7 minutes. 12 minutes. Pieces that almost but not quite fit. Investigators dug deeper into Hargrove's background. Employment records, past addresses, financial history. Nothing overtly alarming, but there were gaps. Periods of time unaccounted for. Short-term jobs that ended abruptly. Moves that didn't quite align with employment changes. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they suggested instability. Not criminality. Just inconsistency. And then came the detail that shifted everything again. A former colleague interviewed years after the fact mentioned something offhand. Something that had never made it into the original reports. Not because it was hidden, but because no one had thought to ask the right question. He used to talk about the cameras, the colleague said. Not in a weird way. Just knew where they were. Said most of them didn't cover what people thought they did. At the time, it had sounded like casual observation. Now, it sounded like something else. Knowledge. Deliberate knowledge. The kind that turns a city's safety net into a map of opportunities. Hargrove was brought back in for questioning. Older now, more reserved, but still calm. He didn't remember much about that specific night. Why would he? It had been years. Hundreds of jobs since then. Thousands of hours of routine work. Nothing about November 2003 stood out to him. He acknowledged knowing the area. Of course he did. It was part of his route. He acknowledged understanding camera placements. Anyone in his line of work would. Security systems, lighting, access points, it was all part of maintenance. Nothing he said was wrong. Nothing he said was incriminating. But something about it felt rehearsed. Not in the sense of memorized lines, but in the absence of hesitation. As if he had already considered these questions long before they were asked. Still, without evidence, there was nowhere to go. The case hovered again on the edge of progress and collapse. And then, from an entirely different direction, another piece surfaced. The phone. Emily's phone had never been recovered, but call data records remained. Tower pings, connection logs, the digital residue of movement. At the time, the analysis had been limited. Technology wasn't what it would become. Now, revisited with more advanced tools, the data revealed something previously overlooked. At 9:39 p.m., just minutes before the last CCTV sighting, her phone connected briefly to a secondary tower. Not the one closest to her route. Another one, slightly off-path. The connection lasted only seconds before dropping back to the primary tower. At the time, it was dismissed as signal fluctuation. Now, it suggested deviation. A shift in position. Small, but measurable. She had stepped somewhere. Not far. Just enough. Enough to enter a blind spot. Enough to disappear. The reconstruction of her final movements tightened around that intersection once more. But now, it wasn't just where she had been seen. It was where she had briefly not been. And in that brief absence, seconds long, maybe less, something had happened. Something precise. Something controlled. Something that left behind no struggle, no sound, no trace. Only a recalibrated timeline. Only a ghost in the footage. Only a man who knew exactly where not to be seen. The pieces were beginning to align. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough to suggest that the silence surrounding that night wasn't empty. It was constructed. Carefully. Deliberately. And whatever had happened in those missing 12 minutes, it had not been an accident. The silence around Daniel Hargrove did not break. It thickened. It settled into the corners of the investigation like dust that no one could quite sweep away. His name stayed, not because it demanded attention, but because it refused to leave. Every time the case circled back to that intersection, to those missing 12 minutes, to the ghost shape on the edge of the frame, his presence hovered just beneath the surface, unconfirmed, unprovable, but increasingly difficult to ignore. And then the past began to move. Not forward. Not in a straight line. It shifted sideways, dragged into the present by something no one had initially connected. A case from 1998. 5 years earlier. Same city. Different borough. Filed. Archived. Nearly forgotten. A disappearance that had once made a brief appearance in the news before being swallowed by something louder, something more immediate. Her name was Lila Mercer. 29. Office administrator. Routine life. Predictable schedule. The kind of person who leaves patterns behind without realizing it. She had vanished on a Thursday evening. Not late. Not in the dark. Just after sunset. A short walk from the underground station to her flat. A route she had taken hundreds of times. No witnesses. No signs of struggle. No body. At the time, it had been classified as a possible voluntary disappearance. Stress, perhaps. A quiet exit from a life that looked stable from the outside. There had been no evidence of foul play. No reason to escalate. Until now. Because when the files were pulled and laid side by side, the similarities didn't just appear, they aligned. Distance from last known location to home, under 15 minutes. Last communication, casual, routine, unremarkable. Final movement, captured partially on CCTV, then lost in a gap between camera angles. And most striking of all, an intersection. A place where visibility fractured. Where presence could be hidden. Where someone could wait. The original investigators in 1998 had noted the camera gap, but the technology at the time made it almost meaningless. Grainy footage. Limited coverage. No clear timeline beyond rough estimates. It had been filed as an unfortunate limitation. Now it looked like a pattern. The two cases were not identical. Different neighborhoods. Different routines. Different victims. But the structure, the underlying shape of the disappearance, was disturbingly similar. And there was one more detail. Maintenance records. In both areas. In both timeframes. Daniel Hargrove. Not as a suspect. Not even as a person of interest. Just a name on a list. A worker assigned to building upkeep. Fixing locks. Adjusting lights. Moving through spaces unnoticed. In 1998, his name had appeared in a service log 2 streets away from where Lila Mercer was last seen. In 2003, he was working within the exact radius of Emily Carter's disappearance. Coincidence? It had to be. London is large, but the maintenance sector overlaps. Workers move. Jobs repeat. Names appear in multiple places. But coincidence has a limit. And investigators were beginning to feel that limit pressing in. The case, once isolated, began to expand. Not outward. Inward. into older files, into overlooked reports, into the quiet spaces where unsolved cases sit waiting for something to connect them. A task force was assembled, not officially announced, not publicized, but formed with a singular focus: find patterns. They started with missing persons cases from the late 1990s into the early 2000s. Female, alone, last seen near residential areas with limited camera coverage. The list grew quickly. Too quickly. London held too many disappearances, too many stories that ended mid-sentence. Most were eliminated. Different circumstances, confirmed sightings, evidence pointing elsewhere. But a handful remained. 3. Then 4. Then 5. Each with subtle variations, but all sharing the same core anomaly: a moment where the subject simply ceased to exist within the observable environment.
No zgelaschen. No visible confrontaschen.
Just a transition from presence to absence within a space that should have recorded more. Investigators overlaid maps, marked the last known positions, drew lines. Not straight lines, not obvious ones, but connections nonetheless. And at the intersection of those connections, not geographically but statistically, one name surfaced again: Hargrove. Not in every case, but in enough. Enough to shift him from background noise to something sharper. Still, suspicion is not evidence. Patterns suggest, they do not prove. To move forward, they needed something tangible, something physical, something that could anchor the theory in reality. And that meant returning, once again, to the places where these disappearances began. The intersections. The blind spots. The spaces where visibility failed. Years had passed. Streets had been repaved. Buildings renovated. Cameras replaced. But structures leave echoes. Angles remain. The way a corner turns, the way a wall blocks sightlines, the way light falls at certain hours. These things persist. Forensic teams began a different kind of examination. Not of what was found, but of what could have been done. They reconstructed scenarios, timed movements, measured distances, tested how quickly a person could be moved from one point to another without detection. The results were unsettling. In each location there existed a window. Small, narrow, but real. A span of seconds where a person could be pulled out of view, if the timing was perfect, if the positioning was exact, if the individual knew precisely where to stand, where to wait, when to act. Not random. Not chaotic. Controlled. Deliberate. The kind of execution that requires more than opportunity. It requires preparation, knowledge, practice. The question shifted again. Not just who could have done this, but who had done it before. Attention returned to Hargrove's history. The gaps in his employment timeline were re-examined with greater scrutiny, not just where he worked, but where he had been assigned temporarily. Short-term contracts, emergency call-outs, jobs that didn't leave a strong paper trail. Patterns began to emerge. Clusters of activity near locations tied to the cases. Not exact overlaps, but close enough to raise questions. Always within reach. Always within proximity. And then came the detail that turned suspicion into something heavier. A storage unit. Rented under Hargrove's name in early 2002. Closed in late 2004. The timing overlapped with Emily Carter's disappearance almost perfectly. The unit had been cleared out years ago. Emptied. Cleaned. Reassigned. At first glance, it offered nothing. But records remained. Payment logs. Access times. Entry frequency. And something about those logs stood out. The access pattern wasn't consistent. Not like someone storing furniture or personal belongings. It was sporadic. Clusters of visits followed by long gaps. Then sudden returns. Often late at night. often brief. Minutes, not hours. As if something was being placed, or checked, or maintained. Investigators tracked down the facility manager from that period. Older now, memory faded, but certain details linger. He didn't keep much in there, the manager recalled. At least not that I saw. No big items.
No furniture. Just boxes, maybe.
Hard to say. He kept it locked, always quick in and out. Nothing illegal. Nothing obvious. But in the context of everything else, it became something else entirely. A possibility. The unit itself had been cleared long ago. No physical evidence remained. But the existence of it, its timing, its usage, its proximity to the timeline, added weight to a theory that was becoming harder to dismiss. A theory that suggested the disappearances were not isolated. Not random. Not disconnected. But part of something structured. Something that had operated quietly, precisely, within the blind spots of a city that believed it was always watching. The investigation, once fragmented, began to coalesce. Not into certainty, but into direction. And at the center of that direction stood a man who had spent years moving unnoticed through the very spaces where people vanished. A man who understood how to fix broken locks, how to adjust lighting, how to navigate unseen paths between buildings. A man who knew where cameras failed. And, more importantly,
why?
The question was no longer whether Daniel Hargrove could be connected. The question was whether anything remained that could prove it. Because suspicion, no matter how heavy, is still just air without evidence to give it form.
And time.
Time erodes everything. Memories fade. Records disappear. Physical traces vanish. Unless something small, something overlooked, something buried in the margins, had survived long enough to be found. Because if even a fragment remained, then the silence that had protected the truth for decades was about to break. And when it did, it would not be quiet. The break did not arrive with a confession. It did not come from a witness suddenly remembering something impossible to forget. It came from a box.
Small.
Unremarkable. Misfiled. It had been sitting in storage for years, buried under newer cases, newer priorities, newer tragedies that demanded immediate attention. The label was faded, the ink almost gone. A routine evidence container tied to the Carter investigation, marked as non-essential, secondary review completed. It had been opened once.
Logged. Closed.
And then forgotten. Until someone no one remembers who not precisely pulled it down during a routine audit of cold case materials. A procedural task. Mechanical. The kind of work that rarely produces anything of value. Inside the box were items already documented. Photographs. Paperwork. A sealed evidence bag containing fibers collected from Emily's apartment. Nothing that had led anywhere before. Nothing that had changed the direction of the case. Except for one envelope.
Thin. Creased.
Tucked beneath a stack of reports. It hadn't been listed in the primary inventory. It wasn't missing, just overlooked. Misplaced within its own container. The kind of error that happens when a case is processed quickly, when multiple hands move through the same materials, when urgency blurs precision. Inside the envelope, a single swab. Labeled in handwriting that had partially smeared with time. Doorframe. Interior left side. Collected during the second forensic sweep of Emily's apartment. Not the first. Not the initial rush when everything is fresh and urgent. This had been taken later, when the scene was quieter. When the obvious had already been ruled out. At the time it had been tested. No match. No database hit. Filed as unknown trace DNA. And then, like so many other things in this case, it had slipped into the background. Now, years later, the swab was processed again. Not because it stood out, but because everything was being processed again. Advances in forensic science had turned old evidence into new possibilities. Profiles that once meant nothing could now be cross-referenced with databases that didn't exist in 2003. The result did not come immediately. Days passed. Then weeks. Routine checks, standard procedures, the kind of slow, methodical work that rarely produces headlines. Until it did. The profile didn't match any existing criminal database, but it did produce a partial familial link.
Distant.
Incomplete. But enough to suggest that the DNA belonged to someone related to an individual already in the system. The search widened. Genealogical tracing began. Family trees constructed from fragments, names, records, connections that stretched across years and locations.
It was painstaking.
Technical. The kind of investigation that doesn't rely on instinct, but on data layered over data until patterns begin to emerge. And then, from that web of connections, a name surfaced. Not a direct match, but close. A relative. Second cousin. On the maternal side. A man with minor offenses on record. Nothing violent, nothing significant, but enough to have his DNA entered into the system. From him, the line extended outward. Branches.
Names.
Connections. Until it narrowed again. Back to a single point. Daniel Hargrove. The match was not perfect. Not yet. But it was enough to justify the next step. A warrant. Not for arrest. For collection. A direct DNA sample. Hargrove did not resist. He complied.
Calm.
Measured. The same controlled demeanor he had displayed years earlier. If he felt pressure, it did not show. If he understood the implications, he did not acknowledge them. The sample was taken.
Logged.
Processed. And for a brief moment, just a moment, the case existed in a state of suspended breath. Because everything now depended on a single comparison. A single alignment of sequences. A confirmation. Or a collapse. When the result came, it did not arrive with noise.
No dramatic announcement.
No sudden shift in atmosphere. Just a report.
Clear.
Clinical. Final. The DNA from the doorframe, collected years earlier, overlooked, nearly forgotten, matched Daniel Hargrove. Not partial. Not suggestive. A full match. The silence that had surrounded his name for years did not shatter. It tightened. Because evidence, real evidence, does not create chaos. It creates focus. The investigation narrowed with immediate precision. No longer circling. No longer speculating. Now it moved forward, direct and controlled. But the match raised as many questions as it answered. Why was his DNA inside Emily's apartment? He had never reported entering her flat. His work logs did not place him there. No maintenance request had been filed for that unit. No reason, legitimate or otherwise, connected him to that space. When confronted, Hargrove did not deny the result.
He questioned it.
Suggested contamination. Cross-transfer. The possibility that he had touched a shared surface, something later brought into the apartment.
A tool.
A handle.
An object.
It was not an unreasonable argument. DNA travels. Indirect contact happens. In isolation, the evidence might not have been enough. But nothing in this case existed in isolation anymore. The pattern of proximity. The knowledge of camera blind spots. The discrepancies in his timeline. The connection to previous disappearances. Now layered with physical evidence, it formed something stronger. Not yet complete, but solid. Investigators returned to the apartment again. Not to search for new evidence, but to recontextualize what was already there. The door frame.
Interior.
Left side. A place someone would touch when entering or leaving. A natural point of contact. But the position of the swab, slightly above average hand height, suggested something else. Not a casual touch. Not a passing brush. A grip. Firm. Deliberate. As if studying oneself. Or controlling movement. The reconstruction shifted. Not a forced entry. Not a struggle that spilled into chaos. But a controlled interaction at the threshold. A moment where Emily was not yet inside. Not fully outside. Caught between spaces. A place where visibility fails. Where sound is contained. Where seconds stretch just long enough for something irreversible to occur. The theory tightened. She had reached her door. She had begun to enter. And in that precise moment, timed, anticipated, executed, someone had intercepted her. Not with noise. Not with violence that leaves marks. But with precision.
Speed.
Control. The kind that leaves behind almost nothing. Almost. Except for a single point of contact. A single trace. A fragment of presence that had survived years of oversight. The investigation moved quickly now. Search warrants executed. Properties linked to Hargrove re-examined. Old addresses revisited. Storage facilities checked again, despite years having passed. Most yielded nothing. Time had done its work. But time does not erase everything. In one former residence, long since vacated, renovated, repainted, a detail emerged during structural inspection. Behind a section of wall, concealed during an earlier modification, a void had existed. Not large. Not obvious. But deliberate. A space that had been created then sealed. Inside, nothing remained. No physical evidence. No objects. Just absence. But absence, in the context of everything else, became something else entirely. A possibility that the missing pieces of this case, of multiple cases, had once occupied spaces like this.
Hidden.
Contained. Removed. The scope of the investigation expanded again. Not in speculation. In necessity. Because if Hargrove was responsible, and the evidence was now pointing in that direction, then Emily Carter was not the only victim. The cold case was no longer just about solving a disappearance. It was about uncovering the full extent of something that had operated unseen for years. Something that had relied on silence. On invisibility. On the assumption that small gaps in time, small failures in observation, would never align. But they had.
Slowly.
Relentlessly.
Piece by piece.
And now, for the first time since 2003, the case was no longer defined by what was missing. It was defined by what had finally been found. A name.
A match.
A presence that could no longer remain hidden. And somewhere, beneath the layers of time and silence, the truth was beginning to surface. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough to change everything. Enough to ensure that what happened in those 12 minutes would not stay buried forever.
Because now.
The darkness had a shape. The moment the DNA result was confirmed, the case stopped being a question of possibility and became a question of scope. Not whether Daniel Hargrove was involved, but how far that involvement extended, how many moments like those 12 missing minutes existed, scattered across years, buried beneath routine, hidden inside ordinary nights that no one thought to remember. The investigation moved with a different kind of urgency now. Not frantic, not chaotic, but precise. Every action measured. Every decision calculated. Because evidence this late, this fragile, does not tolerate mistakes. Hargrove was placed under surveillance. Not immediately visible, not something he could detect easily, but constant. His movements mapped, his routines tracked. The same way investigators had once reconstructed Emily's final walk, they now reconstructed his days. Where he went, how long he stayed, who he interacted with. He lived quietly. Too quietly. A small flat, minimal furnishings. No photographs on the walls. No personal artifacts that suggested connection, memory, or attachment. It felt less like a home and more like a place to exist between movements. He worked less than before. Contract jobs. Short-term maintenance work. Nothing that required long-term oversight. Nothing that tied him too closely to any one location. But the patterns were still there. He chose jobs in older buildings. Structures with outdated security systems. Places where surveillance coverage was inconsistent. Places where blind spots still existed. It was not proof. But it was consistent. Investigators began cross-referencing his recent work with historical case locations. Not just Emily Carter. Not just Lila Mercer. But the expanded list, the cluster of disappearances that had begun to form a pattern. The overlap was not perfect. It never is. But it was enough. Enough to suggest continuity. Enough to justify escalation. A search warrant was executed on his current residence. Everything inside was cataloged,
Documented.
analyzed. At first glance, it revealed nothing.
Clothes. Tools.
Basic household items. A laptop. A phone. Nothing overtly suspicious. Nothing that immediately connected him to the cases. But absence, again, became a detail. No personal history.
No clutter.
No traces of a life lived over decades. It was curated. Controlled. As if everything that did not serve a function had been removed. Digital forensics began immediately. His laptop held little. Basic usage. No significant browsing history. No stored files that raised concern.
His phone was the same. Clean.
Almost deliberately so. But digital silence, like physical silence, can be manufactured. And when it is, it leaves behind its own kind of trace. Fragments.
Data sectors.
Residual data. The kind that requires time and precision to uncover. While that process unfolded, investigators turned back to the past again, not to the crime scenes this time, but to the spaces between them. Transit records. Work routes. Travel patterns. How Hargrove moved through the city. Not just where he worked, but how he got there. And something began to emerge. A consistency in his paths. He avoided main roads when possible. Chose secondary routes. Alleyways. Service corridors. Paths that connected buildings from the inside rather than the outside. The kind of movement that reduces visibility. The kind that allows someone to exist within a city without being seen moving through it. That detail changed the reconstruction of the crimes. It wasn't just about where the victims disappeared. It was about where they were taken. Not far. Not across the city. But into it. Into the spaces that exist behind walls, beneath floors, between structures. Spaces that are not designed to be observed. The void behind the wall discovered in his former residence was no longer an anomaly. It was a clue. A fragment of a method. Investigators revisited other properties he had occupied. Most had been altered. Renovated. Stripped down and rebuilt. Time had erased what might have once been there. But in one location, a building scheduled for demolition, access was granted before the structure was taken down. It was an older property. Poorly maintained. Layers of repairs built over decades. perfect for hiding modifications that would go unnoticed. A full structural scan was conducted. Walls examined. Floors measured. Irregularities flagged. And there, behind a section of reinforced paneling in a maintenance corridor rarely used by residents, another void was found. Larger this time. Not accidental. Constructed. Inside, the air was stale. Undisturbed for years. No immediate evidence of use. No objects. No remains. But the space itself spoke. Not loudly. Not clearly. But enough. Enough to suggest purpose. Enough to confirm that the earlier discovery was not isolated. That these spaces, these hidden compartments, were part of something repeated. Something planned. Something that required access, knowledge, and time. Hargrove had all three. The investigation accelerated. Searches expanded. Every property linked to him was now a potential site. Every gap in his history a possible connection. The list of potential victims was reevaluated again. Not just those who fit the original pattern, but those who had vanished in proximity to his movements. The number grew. Uncomfortably. Quietly. Each name added not as confirmation, but as possibility. A widening circle of uncertainty that suggested the scale of the case might be far greater than initially believed. And yet, despite everything, despite the DNA match, the patterns, the hidden spaces, there was still a missing element. The link that tied him directly to the act. To the moment. To Emily. Because presence at a doorframe, even combined with circumstantial patterns, is not enough to reconstruct a crime beyond doubt. They needed more. Something that placed him there not just physically, but temporally. At the exact moment she disappeared. And that meant returning once again to the timeline. To those 12 minutes. To the seconds that had stretched into decades. The phone data was reanalyzed. Not just Emily's, but every device that had connected to the nearby towers within that window. Thousands of connections. Noise. Data without context. Until filtered. Refined. Narrowed to those that remained within a fixed radius for an unusual duration. Devices that lingered. That did not move as expected. One device stood out. Unregistered. Prepaid. Active intermittently. Connected briefly to the same secondary tower Emily's phone had pinged. Then gone. No subscriber information. No billing trail. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now it became something else. A ghost signal. A digital echo of presence. Investigators cross-referenced the device's activity with other dates, other locations. And slowly, the pattern returned. The same device, or devices operating in the same way, appeared near other disappearance sites. Not always. Not consistently. But enough. Enough to suggest coordination. The question shifted again. Did Hargrove use these devices? Or did they belong to someone else? An accomplice? A second presence? The possibility introduced a new layer of complexity. Because if he had not acted alone, then the scope expanded again. The silence deepened. The structure became more intricate. Interviews resumed. Colleagues. Neighbors. Anyone who had interacted with him over the years. Most described the same man. Quiet. Efficient. Detached. But one account stood out. A former coworker, reluctant at first, then increasingly certain as details resurfaced. There was someone else, he said. Not all the time, but sometimes. A guy who would meet him after shifts. They didn't talk much. Just stood there. Like they were waiting for something. No name. No clear description. Just a presence. Another shadow at the edge of the frame. The investigation widened again. Not in panic. In inevitability. Because the deeper they went, the clearer it became that what had happened to Emily Carter was not a single event. It was part of something larger. Something constructed over time. Something that relied on precision, silence, and the assumption that no one would ever connect the fragments. But now, the fragments were aligning. Slowly. Relentlessly. And with each connection, the weight of the case grew heavier. Because solving a cold case is one thing. Uncovering the full extent of it is something else entirely. And as investigators stood at the edge of that realization, one truth settled in with unsettling clarity. Emily Carter had not just disappeared. She had been taken. Deliberately. Carefully. By someone who had done it before. And possibly had not done it alone. The idea that Daniel Hargrove might not have been alone did not explode into the investigation. It seeped in, quiet, persistent, like water finding its way through cracks no one knew existed. Because once the possibility was spoken out loud, once someone said it without hesitation, it refused to go away. Every piece of evidence, every reconstructed movement, every silent gap in the timeline began to feel shared. Not crowded, not chaotic, just slightly too controlled to belong to one person acting in isolation. The prepaid phone was the first fracture in the assumption of solitude. It didn't behave like a primary device. It didn't mirror Hargrove's known communication patterns. It appeared only at critical moments, short bursts of activity, then silence. Not used for conversation. Used for presence. A marker in time. A signal that something was happening or about to happen. And then it vanished again. Investigators expanded the data sweep beyond London. Not because they expected to find something immediate, but because patterns don't always respect geography. They cross boundaries quietly, especially when no one is looking for them. The results came back slowly. Fragmented. Incomplete. But consistent. The same type of device, same activation behavior, same short-duration tower connections, appeared in 2 other cities over a span of years. Not identical IDs. Not traceable as the same physical handset. But operating within the same narrow parameters. Disposable. Controlled. Intentional. It suggested methodology. Not improvisation. And methodology, once identified, becomes a blueprint. The investigation began mapping not just people but behaviors, patterns of movement, communication, absence. It shifted from identifying suspects to identifying systems. And within that system, Hargrove no longer looked like an anomaly. He looked like a component. That realization altered everything. Because if he was part of something larger, something structured, then the hidden spaces, the blind spots, the precise timing were not just personal tactics. They were shared knowledge, refined, possibly taught. The question became heavier. Who else knew? The interviews intensified. Not just recent contacts, but individuals from years back. Former colleagues, temporary partners on jobs, supervisors who barely remembered his name until prompted. Most yielded nothing. But absence, again, carried weight. Until one interview shifted the tone. A supervisor from the late 1990s, retired now, memory worn but not gone, recalled an incident that had never been formally reported. Not because it was serious, because at the time it didn't seem to be. There was a complaint, he said slowly. A tenant said someone had been inside her flat. Nothing missing. No damage. Just things moved. Slightly. We checked the logs. Hargrove had access that day. He said he'd entered to inspect a leak. There was no leak. We wrote it off as confusion. At the time, it had been a minor irregularity. Now, it sounded different. Entry, without purpose. Presence, without explanation. The idea of him entering spaces quietly, without detection, without leaving immediate trace, began to solidify. But the mention of someone else lingered. The unidentified man described by the former coworker. The possibility that Hargrove had not operated alone. That someone had stood with him in those silent moments between visibility and absence. Investigators turned to surveillance again. Not just of Hargrove, but of his surroundings. Who approached him? Who he met? For weeks, nothing. Routine. Isolation. And then one evening, something shifted. A figure. Arriving without announcement. Not knocking. Not waiting. Entering the building as if expected. The cameras caught only fragments, angles, partial views, but enough to establish presence.
A man.
Similar age.
No immediate identification.
He stayed for 43 minutes. Then left. No interaction visible beyond entry and exit.
No audio.
No context. But the timing, late, deliberate, unannounced, aligned with the pattern that had begun to emerge. The man was tracked. Not immediately.
Carefully. Quietly.
He lived across the city. Different district. Different routine. No obvious connection to Hargrove in official records. His name, Michael Trent. Late 30s. Former contractor. Work history inconsistent. Short-term jobs. Periods of inactivity. Nothing criminal on record beyond minor offenses. But his movements, his patterns, began to echo something familiar. He favored older buildings. Temporary assignments. Work that required access without supervision. The overlap wasn't perfect. But it was enough. Enough to bring him in for questioning. Trent denied knowing Hargrove beyond casual work interactions. Denied visiting his flat. Denied any connection to the cases. But his timeline that evening did not hold. He claimed to have been elsewhere. Alone.
No witnesses. No verification.
The pressure increased. But pressure without evidence only produces resistance. They needed more. Something that connected Trent not just to Hargrove, but to the events themselves. The prepaid phone data was re-examined again. This time, not just for location. For overlap. Moments where multiple devices appeared simultaneously. Clusters of activity. And there it was. A second signal.
Faint.
Intermittent. Appearing in proximity to the first. Not always. But often enough. 2 devices. 2 points of presence. Operating in coordination. One slightly ahead. One slightly behind. Like a shadow with depth. The implications settled heavily. 2 people. Working together. One to intercept. One to manage. Roles not fully understood yet, but structured. Deliberate. Investigators returned to the reconstructions. Replayed the scenarios. This time with 2 actors instead of 1. The results changed. What had once seemed barely possible for a single individual, timing, control, concealment, now became achievable. Even efficient. 1 to watch. 1 to act. 1 to ensure the space remained clear. 1 to move the victim out of sight. Seconds.
Precise. Silent.
The missing 12 minutes no longer felt like a gap. They felt like a sequence. Executed. Repeated. Refined over time. The case, once fragmented, now revealed something more unsettling than a single perpetrator. It suggested a system of cooperation. A method that relied not just on knowledge, but on trust between individuals. And trust, in this context, is dangerous. Because it means planning, communication, shared intent. The investigation tightened around both men. Surveillance increased. Digital forensics accelerated. Every interaction, every movement, every fragment of data was pulled into focus. Because now, the possibility of solving the Carter case was no longer isolated. It was tied to something larger. Something that might explain not just one disappearance, but many. And somewhere within that expanding web of connections, one truth began to take shape with chilling clarity. Emily Carter had not been taken by chance. She had been selected, observed,
Timed.
and removed with precision that suggested experience, practice, coordination. The city that once seemed too vast to conceal such acts now felt different. Structured. Predictable. Filled with unseen pathways connecting one silent moment to another. And as investigators moved deeper into that structure, one realization followed them like a shadow that refused to break away. They were not just uncovering what had happened. They were uncovering how it had been done. And once you understand the method, you begin to see it everywhere. In every blind corner. Every quiet street. Every moment where a person walks alone, believing they are unobserved. Believing they are safe. Because the most unsettling truth was no longer hidden in the past. It was embedded in the present. Waiting. Watching. And now, finally, being seen. The moment Michael Trent entered the frame, the investigation stopped expanding and began tightening. Not smaller, never smaller, but sharper. Edges that had once blurred now aligned. Gaps that once felt empty now held structure.
Two men.
Two presences. 2 points moving through the same silent architecture of the city. It didn't make the case simpler. It made it heavier. Because where there are two, there can be history. And where there is history, there are things that have not yet surfaced. Surveillance shifted from observation to anticipation. Every movement by Hargrove and Trent was no longer just recorded, it was interpreted. Patterns were no longer hypothetical. They were active.
Real time.
Breathing. They did not meet often. That was the first thing. Weeks could pass without contact. Separate routines. Separate districts. Separate lives that, on the surface, barely intersected. But when they did meet, the pattern was unmistakable. Short durations. Controlled environments. No unnecessary movement. No visible exchange. And always, always late. Late enough that fewer people were around. Late enough that the city's rhythm slowed. Late enough that presence could be reduced to shadow. The meetings were not random. They followed a structure. Not a schedule, something looser, more adaptive. Triggered, perhaps, by opportunity or need. Investigators began overlaying those meetings with historical data.
Dates. Times.
Locations. And slowly, something unsettling began to form. Not every meeting aligned with the disappearance, but enough of them did. Close in time. Close in distance. Close enough to suggest correlation. The case crossed another threshold. This was no longer about connecting Hargrove to Emily Carter. It was about identifying a sequence of coordinated actions that spanned years. And if that sequence could be mapped fully, then the truth would not just emerge. It would unfold. Digital forensics delivered the next fracture. Fragments recovered from Hargrove's laptop, deleted files, partially overwritten sectors, began to reconstruct themselves. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough to suggest that something had once been there. Images. Not stored in any accessible folder. Not labeled. recovered from deep within the system where casual users never look. The files were corrupted, distorted. Time had taken its toll, but outlines remained. Shapes. Interiors. Rooms that did not match his current residence. Spaces that felt constructed. Temporary. And in some frames barely visible, objects that did not belong. Fabric. Straps. A chair that looked reinforced in ways normal furniture is not. The images were not definitive. Not enough to confirm what they suggested, but enough to darken the tone of the investigation beyond anything it had been before. Because now the possibility of containment, of victims being held, even briefly, was no longer abstract. It was visual. Partial. But real. Attention shifted to Trent's digital footprint. Cleaner than expected. Too clean. Devices recently reset. Data wiped with more precision than casual deletion. But even precision leaves traces. Residual logs. Connection attempts. Metadata fragments. And within those fragments, a pattern emerged. Encrypted communications. Not standard messaging. Not calls. Data packets sent and received through applications designed to leave minimal trace. Short bursts. Irregular timing. But consistent endpoints. Devices that connected, exchanged, and then vanished. When mapped, those connections intersected with Hargrove's known device activity. Not frequently, but enough. Enough to suggest coordination. Communication without visibility. Planning without record. The pieces aligned further. The two men were not just connected. They were synchronized. Investigators moved to the next phase. Control disruption. A strategy designed not to alert, but to provoke. Subtle changes in their environment. Increased police presence in certain areas. Unannounced inspections of properties they had access to. Shifts that would not trigger alarm immediately, but would create pressure. The goal was simple. Force a reaction. Because reaction reveals intent. For days, nothing changed. Routine held. Patterns continued. Until suddenly they didn't. Hargrove altered his routes. Avoided certain buildings. Cancelled scheduled work. Trent did the same. Reduced movement. Increased isolation. The system had been disturbed. Not broken, but unsettled. And unsettled systems make mistakes. The next meeting between them came sooner than expected. Not planned. Not according to previous patterns. It happened in daylight. A deviation. A risk. Captured on camera more clearly than any prior interaction. They spoke. Briefly. Too far for audio. But their body language said enough. Tension. Urgency. Something had shifted. The investigation accelerated. Because this was the moment. The point where control begins to slip. Where the structure that had held for years starts to fracture. And fractures reveal what was hidden inside. A decision was made. Surveillance would not be enough. Containment would not be enough. They needed to move. But timing was critical. Too early, and whatever remained hidden would stay that way. Too late, and it might disappear entirely. The window was narrow. Defined not by evidence alone, but by behavior. They watched. Waited. Measured every deviation. And then it happened. Trent accessed a property he had not visited in years. An abandoned site scheduled for redevelopment. Unsecured. Unmonitored. Or so it appeared. He entered at 2113. remained inside for 19 minutes, then exited, carrying something, not large, but concealed. That was enough. The decision was immediate. Units moved in. The property was secured. And inside, behind a section of wall that had been recently disturbed, another void was found. But this one was different. Not empty. Inside were items. Clothing. Personal belongings. A collection of objects that did not belong to one person. Or one moment. Each piece catalogued. Each item a fragment of a life interrupted. Among them, a scarf. Recognized immediately. Photographed years earlier. Belonging to Emily Carter. The silence broke. Not loudly. Not with chaos. But with certainty. For the first time, something tangible connected the theory to the victim. The hidden spaces. The coordinated movements. The two men. And now, a physical link. The investigation crossed its final threshold. From reconstruction to confirmation. And as the evidence was laid out, piece by piece, the full shape of what had been hidden for decades began to emerge. Not just a crime. Not just a disappearance. But a system. Built on precision. Sustained by silence. Executed in moments so brief they barely registered in the world around them. Until now. Because now, the fragments were no longer scattered. They were forming something whole. Something undeniable. And somewhere within that structure, the final truth waited. Not hidden anymore. Just one step away from being fully seen. And when it was, nothing about this case would remain the same. The discovery inside the abandoned site did not just escalate the case, it rewrote its foundation. A scarf. A single personal item. Small enough to be overlooked in any other context, but here it carried weight that pressed down on every report, every timeline, every assumption built over years. Emily Carter was no longer just a name on a missing persons file. She was now physically tied to a network of spaces, movements, and decisions that had been carefully hidden in plain sight. And once that link existed, everything around it began to shift. The warehouse, if it could still be called that, was not a crime scene in the traditional sense. There were no obvious signs of struggle, no dramatic remnants of violence, no cinematic chaos. Instead, it was worse. It was controlled emptiness. Spaces intentionally cleared. Surfaces wiped with patience rather than panic. Even the disturbed wall section felt deliberate, as if access had been granted only when necessary and then sealed again when done. Forensic teams worked slowly, methodically, every inch of the space treated as if it might still be speaking, even if quietly. And in that quiet, they found more than they expected. Not more victims, at least not immediately, but traces. Microscopic fragments of material embedded in seams of construction. Fibers caught deep within structural gaps. Residue that suggested repeated use of the space over time, not a single event. This was not a one-time holding location. It was part of a system. And systems once identified demand mapping. Investigators expanded outward again, but this time the expansion felt different. Less like searching, more like assembling. The question was no longer, what happened here, but how many places like this exist? The answer, at first, was unknown. But patterns were beginning to speak louder than silence. Hargrove and Trent were both detained, separately, simultaneously. Not yet charged with the full scope of what was unfolding, but held for continued questioning under evolving suspicion. Their reactions, recorded in detail, were studied as closely as any physical evidence. Hargrove remained composed. Too composed. He answered questions with precision.
No exes de tel. No emotional deviation.
He did not deny knowing Trent. He did not deny working in certain locations. But he also did not volunteer anything beyond what was asked. Trent, in contrast, was more reactive. Short answers, defensive pauses, moments of irritation that surfaced and disappeared quickly, as if controlled, but not fully contained. Neither gave a confession. Neither broke. But breaking, investigators understood, is not always immediate. Sometimes it is gradual. A collapse built from pressure and unseen layers. Meanwhile, digital forensics delivered something that changed the direction again. Encrypted data recovered from Trent's devices revealed fragments of planning documents. Not explicit instructions. Not direct admissions. But structured references, timing schedules, location notes, references to windows, blind intervals, and coverage gaps. Language that aligned too closely with the reconstructed methodology. But one phrase appeared repeatedly. Anchor points. At first, it seemed abstract, technical jargon, possibly unrelated. But when cross-referenced with surveillance mapping and historical reconstructions, a pattern emerged. Anchor points were not theoretical. They were physical locations, intersections, entryways, blind corners, spaces where visibility collapsed just long enough for movement to go unnoticed. The same kind of spaces that had defined Emily Carter's disappearance. The same kind of spaces that had defined others. The realization settled heavily. This was not improvisation. It was architecture. A mental map layered over the city, identifying where reality could be briefly removed from observation. And once that map was understood, the scale of the operation expanded again. Because anchor points existed across multiple boroughs. Across years. Across different cases. The question shifted once more. How many times had this structure been used? And more importantly, how long had it been building before Emily Carter ever stepped into it? A deeper archival sweep was initiated. Not just missing persons cases, but unexplained incidents, partial disappearances, unresolved anomalies in police records that had never fully escalated. The results were unsettling. Not because of volume alone, but because of consistency. Similar patterns emerged in reports dating back further than expected. Late 1990s, early 2000s. Cases previously considered unrelated began to align when viewed through the framework of anchor points and blind intervals. Victims moved through similar environmental structures, similar timing gaps, similar unresolved exits from surveillance. It was not identical in every case, but it was similar enough to suggest repetition. Practice. Evolution. The investigation was no longer dealing with a single event chain. It was dealing with a long-term operational pattern. And that pattern appeared to have adapted over time. Improved. Refined. Each incident slightly more precise than the last. Each disappearance slightly cleaner. More controlled. Less detectable. The implication was chilling. If this was a system, then Emily Carter was not the first. And possibly not even close to the beginning. Interviews with both suspects intensified. This time, investigators shifted strategy. Not direct accusations. Not confrontation. But reconstruction. They played back evidence. Showed timelines. Mapped movements. Layered digital reconstructions of known events over physical locations. The goal was not to force confession, but to force recognition. To create a moment where denial becomes harder to maintain than truth. Hargrove watched silently through most of it, unmoved. Until one segment. A reconstruction of the intersection where Emily was last seen. Camera angles combined. Blind spots highlighted. The exact 12-minute gap visualized in motion. Something changed in his expression. Not dramatically, but enough. A slight tightening around the eyes. A pause that lasted longer than previous pauses. Then control returned. But not completely. It was the first visible fracture. Trent's reaction was different.
He leaned back.
Exhaled sharply. Not denial. Not acceptance. Something closer to resignation. As if the reconstruction was not new to him. As if he had seen it before. Or lived it. That distinction mattered. Because it suggested awareness beyond what had been admitted. Investigators pressed further. Not aggressively. But persistently. And slowly, fragments began to emerge. Not full admissions. Not direct confessions. But inconsistencies. Contradictions in previously stated timelines. Moments where memory failed in precise, inconvenient places. Gaps within gaps. And those gaps began to align with known anchor points. The structure was becoming visible. Not fully illuminated, but outlined. Like a building seen through fog. Then came the most critical development yet. A secondary storage facility was identified. Not previously linked to either suspect directly, but tied through financial records, rental intermediaries, and overlapping access patterns. A warrant was obtained. The facility was searched immediately. And inside, investigators found something that changed the tone of the entire investigation. Not evidence of a single event, but evidence of repetition. Labels.
Logs.
Fragments of documentation referencing multiple dates, multiple locations, multiple deployments. Not named as crimes. Not described in direct terms, but structured. Consistent. Operational. Among the materials was a notebook. Handwritten. Detailed. Not emotional. Not reflective. Procedural. Containing references to timing windows, visibility constraints, and coordination notes between two identifiers that matched Hargrove and Trent. But one line stood out. A phrase repeated multiple times across different entries. Maintain silence between transitions. It did not describe emotion. It described process. And in that process, silence was not absence. It was control. The investigation now had confirmation of something far larger than initially suspected. Not just two individuals. Not just one disappearance. But a sustained framework of coordinated activity that had operated across years without detection. And at the center of it, Emily Carter was now one entry among many. But also the entry that had finally exposed the structure. The case was no longer about finding out what happened to her alone. It was about understanding the entire system that had made it possible. And as investigators stood at the edge of that realization, one truth became unavoidable. They were not just solving a cold case. They were dismantling something that had been functioning in silence for a very long time. And the deeper they went, the more certain it became that they had only just reached the surface. The notebook changed everything. Not because it shouted guilt, but because it removed ambiguity. Until now, the investigation had been assembling a structure from fragments, DNA, patterns, movements, anchor points, timing windows. Each piece strong on its own, but still defensible in isolation. The notebook did something different. It stitched those fragments together into intent. And intent is what separates coincidence from design. It was brought into the forensic lab under strict chain of custody. Every page photographed. Every indentation scanned. Every ink variation analyzed. What emerged was not a diary, not a confession, not an emotional record of events. It was operational.
Sparse.
Functional. Almost mechanical in its precision. Two sets of markings appeared repeatedly across the pages. Hargrove. Trent. Not names written casually. Not identifiers of friendship or memory. They were assigned roles, sometimes abbreviated, sometimes reduced to single letters, but always consistent. H and T.
Next to them were timestamps,
Locations. Short annotations that read less like sentences and more like instructions. Window opens 21:30 to 21:45. Anchor stable. Minimal exposure route confirmed. Secondary pass if primary fails. There was no language of emotion.
no hesitation, no moral framing.
Only execution. The moment investigators realized what they were looking at, the tone in the room shifted. Because this was no longer a reconstruction of a crime. It was the outline of repeated procedure. And buried deeper in the notebook, almost hidden beneath overlapping entries, was a recurring phrase that appeared more often than any other. Maintain silence between transitions. It was not poetic. It was not symbolic. It was operational doctrine. Silence was not absence. It was control over perception, over detection, over the narrow gaps where the city failed to observe itself. Interrogations resumed immediately. This time, the approach changed. The notebook was not revealed at first. Instead, investigators focused on structure, on contradiction, on precision. They reconstructed timelines in front of Hargrove and Trent separately, layer by layer, forcing them to confront their own movements without yet exposing the full extent of evidence against them. For hours, nothing broke. Hargrove remained composed in the same controlled way as before. Answers measured. Eyes steady. Minimal deviation. Trent was more volatile, but still contained. He corrected minor details, shifted posture when certain locations were mentioned, but he did not collapse. Then the canal report arrived. It was not planned. It was not expected. It came from a secondary dredging operation initiated after new spatial mapping of anchor points suggested a possible disposal corridor along an old water route. What surfaced was a sealed evidence bag. Inside, a mobile phone. Corroded, water damaged, but recoverable. Emily Carter's device. Recovery technicians worked through the night. Data extraction was uncertain at first. Water damage had compromised most of the internal storage, but fragments remained. And those fragments were enough. The final outgoing logs were intact. The last active session. The night she disappeared. A video file. Corrupted in parts, but partially reconstructible. When played, it did not show a dramatic struggle. No sudden violence. No chaotic movement. Instead, it showed motion interrupted. A street corner. Dim lighting. Emily walking. Then pausing.
As if hearing something.
The camera angle shifted slightly as she turned. And in that brief moment, less than 2 seconds, 2 figures entered the frame. One closer. One slightly behind. The footage did not capture clear faces, but it captured alignment, positioning, intent, then distortion, interference. And the video ended abruptly. But it was enough. Because now the reconstruction was no longer theoretical. It was visual. The interrogation rooms were sealed for a moment after that. Not out of procedure. Out of recalibration. Because investigators now had something neither suspect could easily dismiss. A shared moment. A captured intersection of time and presence. When questioning resumed, the notebook was placed on the table. Open. Visible. No longer hidden behind inference. The effect was immediate, but not explosive. Neither man reacted dramatically. Instead, something more subtle occurred. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Hargrove looked at it for several seconds without speaking, then leaned back slightly, as if adjusting distance from something that had finally taken physical form. Trent exhaled once.
Slow.
Controlled. then looked away. That difference mattered. Because recognition implies familiarity. And familiarity implies repetition. The questioning shifted again. Now focused on specific entries, specific dates, specific operations. The first direct confrontation came without accusation. Only alignment. You were both at the intersection on November 12, 2003. Silence. The investigators did not repeat the question. They let it settle. Then came a second layer. Emily Carter's phone shows both anchor activation and device proximity within the same 12-minute window. Still silence. But not empty silence. Contained silence. The kind that holds pressure. Then Trent spoke. Not fully, not clearly. Just enough. She wasn't supposed to move. It was not a confession in legal terms. But it was the first break in structure. The first deviation from denial. Hargrove turned slightly toward him. Not in disagreement. In caution. A warning without words. Investigators did not interrupt. They let the space widen. Because once language begins to fracture, it rarely repairs itself cleanly. Trent continued. The timing it was off. The route changed. He stopped. Looked down. Then added quietly. We adjusted too late. That sentence changed everything. Not because it admitted guilt, but because it confirmed agency. Control.
Participation.
Emily Carter was no longer a mystery of disappearance. She was a subject within a system that had attempted to control her movement. And failed. That failure was the key. Because failure leaves traces that success does not. The investigation expanded the timeline backward again. Every anchor point, every coordinated movement, every overlapping presence was reevaluated through the lens of system failure rather than success. And something unexpected emerged. There were moments where the system had been imprecise. Moments where outcomes did not align with expectation. Not all attempts were successful. Not all transitions were clean. Which meant there were survivors. Or near misses. Or deviations that had never been classified correctly. The scope widened further. Now it was not just about identifying victims. It was about identifying all interactions. Every moment the system had touched reality. Every moment reality had resisted. Hargrove was questioned again. This time with the notebook open in front of him. Specific entries highlighted. His name. His initials. His annotations. He did not deny authorship. That was the second fracture.
He simply said,
it was necessary at the time.
No elaboration. No justification.
But no denial. And that absence of denial became more significant than denial itself. Trent, when shown the video fragment, reacted differently. He did not look away immediately. He watched. Fully. Until the distortion ended. Then spoke without being prompted. That's when it went wrong. No one asked him to clarify.
But he did anyway.
She turned too early. She wasn't meant to see us. That sentence redefined the entire event. Not as random interception. Not as opportunistic crime. But as a structured interaction that had deviated from expected behavior. Emily Carter was not just a victim. She was an anomaly within a controlled sequence. And anomalies disrupt systems. The interrogation ended without resolution. But something had fundamentally shifted. The case was no longer speculative. It was structured. Documented. Partially acknowledged by those involved. And for the first time since 2003, the missing 12 minutes were no longer empty. They were populated. By movement. By decision. By error. And somewhere within that reconstructed sequence, the final question began to take shape. Not what happened. Not who was there. But what else had been done in the same way. And never discovered. Because now, the system had been seen. And once something like this is seen, it cannot remain invisible for long. The admission, partial, fractured, almost reluctant, did not close the case. It opened it wider. Because once the phrase, "she wasn't meant to see us," entered the record, everything shifted from reconstruction to confirmation that there had been structure, intent, and repetition. The investigation was no longer trying to solve a disappearance. It was now documenting the architecture of multiple. And that meant one thing above all else. There were more nights like November 12, 2003. Just not all of them had been noticed. The task force returned to the notebook again, but now with different eyes. No longer looking for confirmation of guilt. Looking for continuity. Patterns that extended beyond Emily Carter. And what they found was not additional confessions, but additional structure. Pages that referenced dates without names. Locations without victims. And entries that did not describe outcomes, but conditions. Anchor unstable abort. Visibility compromised, reset cycle. No engagement window, observe only. That last line changed the interpretation of everything. Because it suggested restraint. Not every marked event resulted in disappearance. Some were abandoned mid-process. Some were watched and never executed. Some were simply recorded, as if the system itself was learning. This was not chaos. It was refinement. A methodology evolving over time. And if that was true, then the earlier cases were not isolated failures of detection. They were stages. Investigators widened the historical scope again, this time with a more precise filter. Not just disappearances, but near-pattern events, cases where individuals were last seen in conditions matching anchor points, but where outcomes differed. What emerged was a shadow layer beneath the known case history. People who vanished without explanation. People who reappeared later with fragmented memory or inconsistent accounts. People whose cases had been closed as unsolved, misclassified, or quietly archived. A network of anomalies stretched across nearly a decade. And the disturbing part was not just their existence. It was their similarity. Same environmental structures. Same timing gaps. Same blind spot conditions. The system had not only been used repeatedly. It had been tested repeatedly. Refined like a mechanism adjusting itself to friction. And Emily Carter's case now stood as the moment where that mechanism had finally failed to remain invisible. The interrogation rooms became quieter in tone after that. Not less intense, but more focused. Because investigators were no longer trying to extract a confession. They were trying to map responsibility. Who designed the structure? Who maintained it? Who adapted it? Hargrove and Trent were brought in again separately. This time, the approach was not confrontational. It was reconstructive. Evidence was laid out not as accusation, but as timeline continuity, patterns across years, anchor points across districts, repeated coordination signals. And slowly, the language of denial began to erode. Hargrove, when shown the expanded mapping of cases, did not immediately respond. He studied it, not like someone seeing it for the first time, but like someone seeing it fully for the first time. Then he spoke. It was never supposed to extend this far. That sentence was not a confession in the legal sense. But it was an admission of scope. Trent, when shown the same mapping, reacted differently. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, not in disagreement, but in calculation. "You're grouping everything," he said. Not all of it was the same. But even as he said it, he did not deny involvement in parts of it. He was drawing boundaries. Not denying existence. That distinction mattered. Because boundaries imply segmentation. And segmentation implies participation. The system was not a single act repeated identically. It was a framework applied unevenly across time. Investigators pressed deeper. Who decided the anchor points? Silence. Then Hargrove quietly. They existed before we formalized them. That phrase introduced something unexpected. Pre-existing structure. Not invented. Recognized.
Used.
The implication was chilling. The system had not been created from nothing. It had been discovered, mapped, then operationalized. That changed the moral weight of everything, but not the legal reality. Because even if something is discovered, choosing to use it is still a choice. Digital forensics provided the next fracture point. Recovered communications, previously thought too corrupted, were partially restored using enhanced reconstruction tools. They were not conversations in the traditional sense. They were fragments, instructions disguised as references. Short exchanges between Hargrove and Trent and occasional third-party identifiers that were still being analyzed. But one pattern repeated across multiple entries. Confirm anchor integrity before movement. Secondary presence only if deviation occurs. Do not re-engage outside window. That last instruction was key. It suggested discipline. A rule set. And rules imply organization. The idea of a third party, previously speculative, was reintroduced, but this time with more weight. Because one identifier appeared inconsistently across recovered logs. Not Trent. Not Hargrove. A third signal. Unstable. Irregular. Sometimes present. Sometimes absent. Always unnamed. Investigators labeled it Subject C for continuity. No identity yet. But presence confirmed. And that changed the entire structure again. Because now it was no longer a duo. It was a system of three. Or at least one that had included three at some point. The implication expanded outward. If Subject C existed, then control was distributed. Roles were specialized. Coordination was more complex than previously assumed. The notebook contained indirect references to this third presence, but never directly, only phrases like C override required, C absent abort cycle, C stabilizes anchored deviation. That meant Subject C was not peripheral. They were functional, essential, and now missing. The investigation intensified immediately. Every known associate of Hargrove and Trent was reevaluated under this new framework. Not just acquaintances, but anyone who had shared overlapping work environments, access points, or time frames. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge around a previously overlooked figure. A contractor who had worked intermittently with both men across multiple sites. Not consistently, not formally attached, but present in overlapping periods. Records were fragmented. Name variations existed across contracts. But one recurring alias appeared in maintenance logs.
Ellis.
No confirmed full identity yet, but enough overlap to warrant immediate focus. Interviews were attempted with known associates of that alias. One provided a critical detail. He wasn't like them, the witness said. He didn't talk much. But when he did, it was always about timing. Like everything had to happen in the right order, or it wouldn't work. That detail aligned too closely with the system described in the notebook. Timing. Windows. Anchor stability. Order of execution. The structure was no longer just theoretical. It was doctrinal. And now it had at least 3 known operators. The case had expanded again beyond Emily Carter. But investigators were not losing control of it. They were gaining shape. Because each new layer was not chaos. It was consistency. And consistency means traceability. Then came the final development of this phase. A sealed storage ledger, previously inaccessible due to legal restrictions, was opened under new authorization. It contained rental histories tied to multiple properties linked indirectly to Hargrove and Trent. And within it, a pattern that had never been noticed before. Simultaneous access periods. Overlapping rentals. Shared access codes used across different identities. And one repeated marker. Maintenance Coordination Unit. It was not a formal designation. It was internal shorthand. But it appeared across multiple properties. Across multiple years. And always in proximity to known anchor points. That was the final confirmation investigators needed. Whatever this was, it was not improvised. It was maintained. And maintenance implies continuity, which means it did not end in 2003. It only became visible then. The implications settled heavily over the entire task force. Because Emily Carter's disappearance was no longer the beginning of understanding. It was the moment the structure failed to stay hidden. And now, with 3 names emerging, with systems identified, with patterns confirmed, one truth became unavoidable. This case was no longer about solving a single cold case. It was about dismantling something that had been operating for years. Quietly, precisely. And almost successfully. And somewhere still missing from the record was the full identity of Subject C. The third presence that had once stabilized the system. And might still be out there. The name R. Ellis did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived like a correction. A final adjustment to a picture that had already been forming for too long to still feel incomplete. Once it surfaced in the ledger, everything else stopped being theoretical. Overlapping rentals. Shared access codes. Maintenance coordination logs. Anchor point proximity. It all converged toward a single uncomfortable conclusion. The structure had always been 3-dimensional, not binary. Hargrove. Trent. And the third presence that had been missing from every earlier reconstruction. Subject C. Now finally, partially named. But not yet fully known. Investigators did not rush the identification. They could not afford to. Because names in this case had already proven deceptive. Daniel Hargrove had once been a maintenance worker in a database. Michael Trent had once been a contractor, with inconsistent records. And now R. Ellis existed as a fragment stitched together from administrative traces and overlapping authorizations. The first verified identity link came from a payroll archive. Not police data. Not forensic analysis. Payroll. A contractor network from the early 2000s, partially digitized, partially lost to time. Within it, a short entry appeared repeatedly alongside both Hargrove and Trent during specific overlapping assignments. R. Ellis. Infrastructure access support. No full legal name attached. Just that designation. And a payment method that stood out immediately. Not bank transfer. Not standard payroll routing. But a third-party intermediary account used for temporary field coordination. That detail mattered more than it should have. Because it confirmed integration. Ellis was not external. He was embedded. The investigation expanded outward one final time. Every known job site shared between the 3 identifiers was mapped again, but now with a new lens, not where victims disappeared, but where systems intersected. And when those maps were layered, something disturbing emerged. The anchor points were not random. They formed clusters. Geometric groupings across districts. Like nodes in a network that repeated structure in different parts of the city. Not identical layouts, but similar configurations. Always within reach of older infrastructure. Always near buildings with compromised visibility. Always within controlled maintenance access. The conclusion became unavoidable. The system was not improvised per location. It was replicated. A template applied repeatedly across different environments. Which meant experience. Which meant learning. Which meant time. Ellis was brought in under controlled conditions. Different facility, different approach. By now, none of the three men were treated as simple suspects. They were nodes in a larger reconstruction effort. Each interrogation was part evidence extraction, part behavioral mapping. Ellis did not react the same way as the others. Where Hargrove was controlled, Ellis was precise. Where Trent was reactive, Ellis was detached. He answered questions directly, without evasion, without emotional deviation, but also without expansion. Everything he said was minimal, intentional. When shown the payroll records, he did not deny association.
He simply said,
It was coordinated work. That phrase carried weight, because it did not describe crime. It described structure. Investigators pressed. What was coordinated? Ellis paused. Not long. Just enough to suggest calculation. Access, he said. Timing. Movement between sites. Then added, almost neutrally, You already understand the rest. That statement changed the tone of the room, because it implied shared understanding. Not explanation. Recognition. At that moment, investigators realized something critical. Each man held only partial visibility of the system. None of them were describing the whole structure individually. But together, their accounts were converging into a complete model. A distributed operation. Segmented responsibility. Controlled interaction points. Hargrove, environmental access and spatial knowledge. Trent, timing execution and field coordination. Ellis, structural planning and system design. Not equal roles. Complementary ones. And Emily Carter's disappearance had been executed at the intersection of all three. The reconstructed timeline was revisited once more. This time with full integration. Not just CCTV. Not just phone data. Not just anchor point mapping. But behavioral overlays from all three suspects. What emerged was no longer a gap in time. It was a sequence. A chain of coordinated actions spanning less than 12 minutes, but constructed over years of preparation. Ellis initiated structural readiness. Hargrove confirmed environmental clearance. Trent executed movement coordination. Each step dependent on the others. Each step invisible alone. But together. A complete mechanism. Emily Carter entered that mechanism at precisely the wrong moment. Or, more accurately, at the moment it activated. The final CCTV reconstruction was enhanced using every available data layer, not to reveal new images, but to clarify motion. And for the first time, investigators could see the full interaction of the three-point system. Not faces. Not clarity. But positions. One at the edge of visibility. One near the intersection. One controlling timing distance. And Emily moving into that structure unknowingly. The video did not show violence. It showed transition. A moment where movement ceased to be random and became directed. Then interruption. Then absence. The screen still ended in distortion, but now the distortion was understood. It was not failure. It was completion. The interrogation of Ellis continued for several hours after that realization. He remained calm. But something had changed. Not in tone. In acknowledgement. When asked directly if Emily Carter was the only case, he did not answer immediately. Instead, he said, "You're looking at the most visible failure point." That sentence was the closest thing to confirmation they had received. Not denial. Not evasion. Acknowledgement of multiplicity. Other cases existed. And Emily Carter was the one that broke the system. Investigators pressed harder. How many? Ellis looked at the table. Not at the investigators. And said nothing. silence. But this time, silence did not feel like resistance. It felt like containment. Because the number was not unknown. It was simply unspoken. Meanwhile, Hargrove and Trent were shown the integrated reconstruction. All data combined. All timelines aligned. All anchor points mapped across years. Neither man denied what they were seeing. Hargrove finally spoke. It was never meant to escalate beyond control. Trent added quietly. It worked until it didn't. That distinction mattered. Because it confirmed intent without explicitly naming outcome. They were not denying participation. They were describing system failure. The investigation reached its final structural phase. Not resolution yet, but exposure. Every known anchor point had now been mapped. Every overlapping movement reconstructed. Every identified operator accounted for. Except one. The missing variable was no longer Ellis. It was what had existed before the system stabilized into 3 roles. The origin point. The first application. Because systems like this do not appear fully formed. They evolve. Which meant there had been an earlier phase. Unrecorded. Unidentified. Possibly years before Emily Carter. Investigators began searching older archives again. Not missing persons cases. Not even crime reports. But maintenance records. Infrastructure logs. Access control systems from the late 1990s. And buried within them, something finally surfaced. A pattern of unauthorized access events across multiple properties.
Small.
Infrequent. Difficult to interpret at the time, but now recognizable. Early versions of anchor point testing. Before formalization. Before coordination. Before structure stabilized into 3 roles. And attached to those earliest entries. A single recurring notation. Trial Coordination Unit. No names.
No identities.
Just system emergence. The beginning. The investigation now had everything needed to understand the mechanism. Not just who. Not just how. But when it started to form. And in that realization, Emily Carter's case changed again. She was no longer just a victim of a system. She was the point at which the system became visible enough to be dismantled. The final silence in the interrogation room that day was different from all the others. Because this time, it was not holding back information. It was holding back collapse. And somewhere beyond the file rooms, beyond the evidence tables, beyond the reconstructed timelines, the full shape of what had operated in London for years was finally exposed. Not completely destroyed yet, but no longer invisible. And for the first time since 2003, the city could see what had been moving inside its blind spots all along.